Chapter 22. The next day after the rain stopped, Border Town became lively again. Many villagers gathered in the square, talking and waiting for the speech of the fourth prince. For this speech, Roland had posted a notice on the bulletin board the day before. Anyone who came to the square to listen to the speech would receive a bowl of wheat porridge and half a piece of bread. For the townspeople, this was equivalent to a free lunch, so the number of people who came to watch the hanging was much more. When it was almost noon, Roland stepped onto the high platform that had been set up. Facing the dense crowd at his feet, he would be lying if he said he was not nervous. In the past, he dealt with computer monitors the most. Even during the meeting, he only needed to applaud from the audience. This was the first time that he had to personally participate in such a big scene. But he had to go. If he wanted everyone to stay in Border Town, he must have a general mobilization. Roland waved his hand, letting everyone quiet down. He had practiced this scene many times, but when he stepped onto the stage, his mouth was still a little dry. My people, good afternoon. I am the fourth prince of Greycastle Kingdom, Roland Wimbledon. At this moment, I have gathered everyone here because I have an important news to tell you. The envoy from Longsong Stronghold arrived here 4 days ago. They came for the ore delivery. As you all know, a month ago, we encountered an unfortunate accident. The North Slope mine cave collapsed. Until today, the mine has not fully resumed production. This accident resulted in only 2 months of ore production in the last quarter. I explained the situation to the envoy and hoped that he could allocate the full amount of food to Border Town, and the lack of ore will be made up after the end of the winter. But he refused. There was no room for negotiation. He refused to allocate more food, just like 2 years ago. The crowd burst into exclamations. Obviously, everyone had a deep impression of the food shortage incident 2 years ago. And this time, it is obviously worse. The astrologer of Greycastle told me that this year's winter will be longer than before, and the months of the demons is likely to last for more than 4 months. In other words, this time, everyone is likely to face a food shortage for 2 months. 2 years ago, you lost 20% of your companions. Some people lost their brothers. Some people lost their children. This time, how much more do you want to lose? No. Your Highness, save us. Someone shouted, and then more people shouted, Your Highness, please help us. It seemed that preparing a few people in advance was the right choice. Roland raised his hand, suppressing the voices of the crowd. Of course, I will not leave my people, not a single one. You may not know, but the price of wheat and bread shipped from Longsong Stronghold every year is completely different from the ore they shipped. According to the normal market price, 2 months' worth of ore is enough for half a year's worth of food. I have already sold the ore to the merchants of Willowtown, and their cargo ships carrying food will soon arrive at Border Town. In addition to bread, there is cheese, honey wine, and dried meat. It's enough for a whole winter's worth of food. Everyone will be full. The square suddenly burst into cheers. But this is tantamount to breaking off our relationship with Longsong Stronghold. They won't accept another person. So this winter, we will spend the winter in Border Town. Most people had already seen that on the west side of Border Town, a solid wall was being built. I know some people are worried about whether we can stop the demonic beasts when they attack. I want to tell you, the demonic beasts are not much stronger than the beasts in the forest. Although they have thick skin, they can't climb the wall, they can't bite the stone. Even if their skin is thick, they are just a group of poor targets. Tell me, my people, do you want to hide in the shacks of Longsong Stronghold and starve to death? Or do you want me to lead you to protect your loved ones and children, and defend Border Town until the last moment? I promise that as long as we hold out until the end of the months of the demons, all the townspeople who fight on the wall will get a reward of 25 silver royals. For those who unfortunately die, their families will get 5 golden dragon as compensation. We are willing to fight for your highness. Under the guidance of the people, they shouted and vowed to fight to the death. Seeing the atmosphere rising, Roland timely ordered the distribution of lunch. He didn't expect everyone to stay in Border Town. As long as half of the people were willing to stay, he was sure that they could stop the demonic beasts from advancing eastward. Perrault naturally didn't know how Prince Roland had arranged for him. When he brought the news back to the 6 aristocratic families in Longsong Stronghold, he only got a burst of laughter in response. You said that the naive prince actually wants to get rid of us and do it alone? He dares to repair the wall before winter. Should I praise him for his bravery, or laugh at him for overestimating himself? Prince Roland's bravery is well known. When did Prince Roland also have this courage? He's just ignorant. Yes, he doesn't even have a stonemason. He only relies on the unpolished stones to pile up, with some wet mud in the middle. I'm afraid the pile will collapse. Anyway, it's a good thing. If he escapes back to Longsong Stronghold, naturally he will be at our mercy. If he dies in Border Town, we can also end this farce earlier. The Duke, who had been meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his mouth. Perrault, what do you think? Perrault was startled for a moment. He didn't expect that the Duke of Longsong Stronghold would ask for his opinion. Well, I originally wanted to maintain the monopoly. As long as it's 30% lower than the market price, it's still a worthwhile business for us. But his mind was quickly sorting out his thoughts. But His Highness doesn't intend to let Longsong Stronghold monopolize the ore. He's willing to sell the ore at a 50% lower price, which means that he has a plan to greatly increase the ore production next year. As long as we increase the production by twice as much as before, we may earn more than before. He also intends to produce his own ironware to sell. Ironware is in high demand everywhere. It's also very easy to resell it. But these are not the main points. Oh, what's the main point? If he can defend Border Town, it's also excellent news for Longsong Stronghold. We don't have to focus on fighting the demonic beasts every year. This can save us a huge amount of money. The second advantage is that the vast land between Longsong Stronghold and Border Town will belong to us. Whether it's reclamation or migration, it's a good choice. It can greatly alleviate the current situation of overcrowding in Longsong Stronghold. Perrault said one by one the ideas in his mind. Moreover, Prince Roland won't stay in Border Town forever. 5 years later, we will have a more prosperous Border Town, after which we can incorporate the town into Longsong Stronghold, and Longsong Stronghold will become the 3rd largest territory in the kingdom. So my suggestion is, he glanced at the Duke and cautiously said, Longsong Stronghold should send people to help His Highness build the wall, and cooperate with him in defending Border Town. That's right, the Duke smiled. But it's just a businessman's idea. They only see the gains and losses. Chapter 23. Come on, try to put these 2 iron plates together, Roland said. Anna stretched out her finger and pressed on the seam of the iron plate. Flames spurted out from her finger, and the seam melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. Reduce the fire, and do it from the back. She nodded, and did as he said. The 2 iron plates were joined at 90 degrees, and were firmly welded together. Roland carefully examined the seam, and found that the effect was just as he imagined, a perfect weld without any flaws. If it was polished a little, and the traces of liquid from the melting of the iron were ground away, the 2 iron plates were almost no different from a forged body. Very good, Miss Anna, this is amazing. Roland couldn't help but praise. Next, let's connect the other 2 iron plates. What is this? A bucket made of iron? No, this is a cylinder, he corrected. Cylinder? Anna repeated in confusion. Yes, it can be used to fill air. Roland pointed to the other square iron plate. Do you see the small hole on it? Air enters the cylinder through this small hole and pushes the piston. The piston is an iron plate slightly smaller than the diameter of the cylinder. It can move freely in the cylinder. Even Anna was confused by so many new words. Then these cylinders, pistons, what are they used for? To make a machine that can move automatically. The steam engine brought about the power needed for the first industrial revolution of mankind, completely liberating human and animal power. Its schematic was familiar to every mechanical dog. In simple terms, it was an enlarged version of a kettle. The boiling steam was directed into the cylinder, pushing the pistons and connecting rods, converting heat energy into mechanical energy. The principle was extremely simple, but it didn't mean it was easy to make. The difficulty was the airtightness of the cylinder and the piston, as well as the production of the gas pipe. Without enough metal processing skills, It was impossible to rely on manual forging to make a qualified cylinder. However, Anna's ability perfectly made up for the lack of craftsmanship. Roland only needed to design 4 iron plates of the same size in advance, let the blacksmith shop cast and grind them, and then use the right angle plate to fix the shape, and then let Anna weld them together to get an extremely high rigidity square cylinder. With the help of the witches, he didn't have to build a barrel boring machine like the traditional production process, and then process a round cylinder. The same was true for the other large parts, which could be cut into small pieces and then pieced together. In this way, even a small workshop like a blacksmith could work together to produce all the parts needed for the steam engine. In fact, before welding was invented, people could only rely on bolts or rivets to connect small parts, and the inside of the cylinder had to be smooth, which was obviously not possible with conventional connections. The only problem was the air duct. The method of making it was nothing special. First, heat a long iron plate until it was red hot, then put it into a grooved mold, and then use a hammer to hammer it into shape. This was also the method of making a front-loading flintlock gun barrel. However, the barrel still needed to be straightened, drilled, and so on, which was a bit more complicated. The problem was that it was impossible for Roland to call the blacksmith to his back garden. The witches could not be exposed for the time being, and blacksmithing was not his strong point. In desperation, he could only let the chief knight do it, while he himself commanded from the side. In this way, after 3 days of torment, Roland finally pieced together the first steam engine in his back garden. "Is this the thing that you said has infinite strength?" Carter frowned as he looked at this strange machine. First of all, he was sure that this thing had nothing to do with the cult's rituals. Every iron lump on it was personally installed by him, making it look like a sealed furnace. If the devil could be attracted to it, then it would be too unreasonable. But how could a pile of iron lumps move? It looked very clumsy, and it had no feet. Could it fly? But in Roland's eyes, this seemingly simple machine exuded the beauty of industry. Standing on the shoulders of giants, he naturally did not follow the route of Newcomen's steam engine, or Watt's steam engine. His first prototype was a high-pressure steam engine with double connecting rods and sliding valves. Its production was not much more difficult than the most primitive steam engine. The key was some innovation. You'll know later. Roland poured a bucket of water into the steam room and let Anna light the firewood. 10 minutes later, the water was boiling, and it began to boil. Soon, a crackling sound came from the cylinder. Roland knew that it was the sound of the cylinder expanding. The iron plate of the piston was relatively thin, so the expansion was larger than the cylinder, and it would eventually be firmly pressed against the cylinder wall. "Isn't this boiling water? I didn't expect it to really be a furnace," Carter muttered. When the cylinder was filled with steam, a scene that made Roland very excited appeared. The piston began to push the connecting rods outward, and when the movement reached the apex, the other connecting rod pulled the sliding valve, and the steam pushed the piston inward. The 2 connecting rods rotated back and forth with the wheel, and with the increase of firepower, the speed soon reached the peak. The machine issued a harsh roar, and the exhaust spat out white gas, with an unstoppable momentum. "This is what you said, the power hidden in nature?" Anna asked blankly. Chief Knight's face was full of disbelief. The last big iron wheel was installed with a lot of effort, but now it was spinning as fast as a feather. Standing next to it, he could even feel the air stirred up by the wheel. This could only mean that the strength of the iron lump in front of him had reached an amazing level. A trace of uneasiness gradually rose in his heart. His Royal Highness said that it could replace human and animal power. If it wasn't a lie, when it replaced the horses pulling the chariot, with this brute force, I'm afraid that even 10 knight would find it difficult to resist. It took 15 years to train a qualified knight, but it only took 3 days to make such an iron furnace. Counting the time it took for the blacksmith to build the parts, it would only take a week. It didn't need to be fed. It wasn't afraid of cold and hunger, and it wasn't afraid of arrows and swords. As long as the front was installed with a ram, it could rampage on the battlefield. In this way, is there still a need for the traditional knight to exist? In the evening, when Roland returned to his bedroom, he once again saw Nightingale. This time she didn't wear a hood, sitting at the table with a smile on her face, fiddling with a few pieces of parchment. It seems that the rumors outside really can't be trusted. They say that the fourth prince is ignorant and has a bad character. But in fact, he is not much worse than a court master. Is this the drawing on the paper, the design of the iron furnace? You call it the steam engine, right? I'll go. Can't you give me some privacy? You want to come and go as you please. Do you think this is your home? Roland's heart was full of criticism, but on the surface he still acted as if nothing had happened. It's a design, but without Anna's help, it's just a drawing. What can it do? A lot: transporting or draining water, smelting iron, forging. As long as you need to use a lot of strength, it can play a role. Then I'll accept it. Nightingale rolled the parchment and put it into her robe. The Witch Cooperation Association also has people who can control flames. Hey! She waved her hand to stop Roland's protest. Of course, I'm not taking your things for free. You first take a look at this. She put a small white ball on the table. Roland walked over, picked it up with his fingers, and found out that it was actually a roll of paper. He gently unfolded it and glanced at it. This is a secret letter sent by pigeon, Nightingale said in a joking tone. The recipient is your maid Tyr. TSK. It seems that your harem is not stable. I haven't touched her, Roland frowned. Tyr. In his memory, this woman seemed to have been with him for a long time. Originally, the fourth prince was very interested in her, but failed several times to harass her. Now that he had come to Border Town, he might as well promote her to the position of head maid and have her serve him personally. Her room was arranged next door. I didn't expect her to be a spy arranged by my brother and sister, although this letter was not signed, but judging from the content, it was most likely written by my brother and sister. The letter said that the last failure made the master very unhappy, and that the next time Longsong's stronghold was in turmoil, they would never allow another failure. Well, in fact, you have succeeded, he thought. Otherwise I wouldn't have become Roland Wimbledon. This letter was unlikely to be forged by Nightingale, because only those who participated in this conspiracy would clearly know the first assassination plan. And if Nightingale wanted to kill him, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Did you steal it from her? Your maid isn't that stupid. She wanted to burn it after reading it. It's a pity that I happened to be behind her when she read it. She made a swapping gesture. So, what are you going to do? Do you need my help to deal with it? Roland naturally understood what she meant by deal. He hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. I'll have to trouble you. He really didn't have the confidence to do this kind of thing himself. If you can ask for me, who is behind her? Chapter 24. When Roland got up in the morning, it wasn't Tyr who served him, but an old maid. When he walked out of the bedroom, Chief Knight Carter was waiting for him outside. Your Highness, I have to tell you a piece of unfortunate news, he said in a low voice. Your head maid died last night. What? Roland's eyelids twitched. Although he already knew this would be the result, he still felt a little uncomfortable. After all, this person died because of him. She fell from the balcony of the room. There were no signs of fighting at the scene, and the guards didn't see any outsiders coming in or out. So, it should be an accident that she accidentally fell. The knight reported the results of the investigation, and at the same time looked at Roland with a strange expression. Of course, Roland knew what he was thinking. In Grey Castle, it was well known that Prince Roland wanted to take Tyr by force many times. In this era, it was normal for a prince to have sex with his maids. There were few entertainment activities and almost no nightlife. When they had nothing to do after eating, they would naturally think of making babies. Not only did they make babies, but the princes and the upper nobles would also exchange women, and even gather together to have a baby-making party. So it wasn't just a joke that the noble circle was really messy. Prince Roland was already relatively restrained in this aspect. After it was replaced by Roland, he didn't even touch a woman. Except for Tyr, the other maids could be said to be of poor quality. In addition, after crossing over, he had to face the months of demons. His mind was almost filled with farming plans, and he didn't have time to enjoy the romantic life of a noble. It's really a pity. Roland pretended to be regretful. Let the old maid who served me this morning take care of Tyr's funeral. She will be the new head maid." Carter nodded, saluted and left. As soon as Roland stepped into the office, he saw Nightingale sitting on the mahogany table. "Did you get any information?" "Nothing. When she saw me, she committed suicide." Her tone was a little depressed. "It was too fast, without the slightest hesitation. You didn't subdue her." Roland walked around him and sat back on the armchair. "I tied her up." Nightingale leaned over and said, "I didn't expect her to hide poison in her teeth. I had to fake it as an accident." "I thought you were experienced, but you still have the nerve to ask for remuneration? Hey, don't say that. Although I didn't get anything from her, it doesn't mean that I didn't get anything." Nightingale chuckled and placed a folded piece of paper in front of Roland. "I found this in her room." Roland unfolded the paper. It was a letter from home. The sender addressed Tyr as his sister, and the content was just a casual chat. However, he noticed that she mentioned the sea many times, such as how beautiful the seaside scenery was, and how she liked to stay on the beach to watch the sunset. At the end of the letter, she asked when her sister would come back. She missed her sister very much. Thinking of the territories of the siblings, Roland asked uncertainly, "Third princess of the port of Clearwater? That's probably what happened. Your two brothers can't see the sea." According to my speculation, Third Princess Garcia Wimbledon held her sister hostage and used her as a hidden chess piece. Judging from her decisive style of suicide, it was unlikely to be a random arrangement. That is to say, before she was placed by your side, she received at least 2 to 3 years of relevant training. Roland sighed softly. Sure enough, the fight for the throne would not end so easily. Even if he didn't fight, it didn't mean that he would stay out of it. For the throne, his brothers and sisters didn't care at all. Similar things would probably happen again in the future. Someone's coming. I'll take my leave first, Your Highness." Nightingale teasingly blew a breath towards Roland, and then disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although it was not the first time he had seen it, it still shocked Roland to see it in broad daylight. He hesitated and tentatively stretched out his finger towards the empty table. Halfway through, he was intercepted by a soft hand. "Your Highness, you will make Anna sad if you do this." Well, it seems that her ability is invisibility, not disappearance, Roland thought. Otherwise it would be too terrible. There was a knock on the door. "Your Highness, I'm Barov." Roland took back his finger and returned to his expressionless appearance. "Come in." The assistant minister came into the office with a large bundle of files. His butt hadn't even warmed up when he began to report on the state affairs of the past week. Roland also put away his thoughts and concentrated on listening to him. After more than a month of being influenced, he found that he could keep up with the rhythm of the other party. He was no longer dizzy and completely confused. In general, Border Town's financial situation had improved to a certain extent. After selling ore and gemstones to Willow Town, they received nearly 200 golden dragon. After this money was used to buy food and pay wages, there were still 90 left. Barov was also in a good mood. With money in his hands, it wouldn't be too difficult to get through this winter. However, Roland was destined to not let him stay idle. "I want to select a group of people from my subjects to fight against the demonic beasts. From now on, they must gather together and receive training. The instructor will be my chief knight. I will explain the specific situation to him. You have to make a purchase plan. These people must have a strong leather armor and a spear. They must also have 2 sets of winter clothes that can be changed." "Your Highness, this according to the usual practice, shouldn't we temporarily recruit people to fight? The troops that go to the battlefield without training are just a group of mobs. Do you think they can scare away the demonic beasts by relying on their numbers? It will be more troublesome if they collapse. Do you really intend to defend Border Town?" Barov asked hesitantly. "If we really can't defend, of course we will retreat. But I don't think we can't even deal with a few mutant beasts. If we do according to your plan, we will have to spend more money." Roland was amused by the stingy look on the man's face. "These are necessary expenses. Hurry up and get it done." He still had more than 300 golden dragon in his own treasury, which was mainly used to pay for the construction of the city wall. The materials and parts needed for the steam engine were also bought from his own pocket. The first machine cost almost 20 golden dragon, and he needed at least 3 more. It was true that the steam engine drove the first industrial revolution, but it didn't mean that the steam engine was equal to the Industrial Revolution. Historically, the United Kingdom was in urgent need of a new power to replace people and livestock to meet mining production. After what improved the steam engine, he immediately received a large number of orders. This new power was also popularized in various industries in a short time. Chapter 25. These are the people you recruited? Roland looked at the group of ragged civilians in front of him, his heart filled with the impulse to turn around and leave. Your Highness, they were selected according to your requirements, Carter said while counting with his fingers. Male non-criminal, over 18 years old, under 40 years old, no physical disabilities. I carefully checked them. Well, he knew he shouldn't have too many expectations. After all, the productivity of this world was so low that it was difficult to even eat, so it was normal to be poorly dressed. As a prince, the treatment he received made him ignore this point. As long as he walked out of the castle, he could see homeless people begging for a living everywhere. In fact, even in the capital of the kingdom, Grey Castle, there would be people who collected corpses. What they did was to drag the bodies of starving people to be cremated every day. So in the end, what was the fighting mode of this world? Roland closed his eyes and carefully thought about it. It was probably a little more advanced than a hooligan fight. Generally speaking, when the Lord decided to start a war, or a fight, Roland didn't think that this kind of fight could be linked to the word war. He would summon the nobles in his territory, and the nobles would then summon the nobles of the lower level in their territory. For example, the Duke would summon the Count would summon the Viscount, and the Baron, and so on. Most of these nobles had a group of knight and mercenaries as their own personal strength. They were the main force of the battle, basically equipped with full armor and excellent weapons. At the same time, they would also recruit the civilians and farmers in their territory to fight. In fact, it was to deliver food to the army, and when needed, they would rush to the front line as cannon fodder. In the battle, the most casualties were these cannon fodder. In the battle between nobles, as long as they didn't die on the battlefield, they would generally be taken back and exchanged for ransom. Roland naturally didn't expect the nobles of Border Town to help him fight. In fact, they had nothing to do with Border Town. Most of them were barren and theft by the Lord of Longsong's stronghold, and their territory was also under the jurisdiction of the stronghold. An army composed entirely of civilians in this era was a very imaginative thing. They were stupid and ignorant. They could not understand the documents, could not understand the orders, and had never gone through professional combat training. How could they compare to the knight, who had been practicing swordsmanship since he was 10? Carter approached Roland and advised in a low voice. Your Highness, this matter was never feasible. Look at them. Which one of them can hold a sword? When they encountered demonic beasts, they would probably scatter in confusion, which would affect the stability of the defensive line. I suggest that we hire professional mercenaries from Willowtown or other places to guard the city walls. These people should be left to do some chores. No, I'll use them, Roland refused. He did not have a good impression of those mercenaries who worked for money. Besides, he did not build the army just to deal with demonic beasts. Throughout history, the members of a strong and vigorous army must come from the people. Whether it was the feudal army, the modern army, or the modern army, they had all proved this rule countless times. All right, whatever you say. The knight shrugged. Then I'll start training them how to hold the sword tomorrow, even though it might not be of much use. Use the sword? No, you first take them to line up and run. Roland suddenly thought that the chief knight might not have experienced this training himself, so he had to change his mind. You call the hunter you found last time. You first watch how I do it. Vanner experienced more incredible things today than he had in the previous 20 years. He actually saw the fourth prince of the kingdom, His Highness Roland Wimbledon, at a close distance. He walked in front of him and smiled at him. My God, is the prince drunk? 3 days ago, when the fourth prince gave a speech in the square, he knew that this winter would be different from the past. They would not go to Longsong Stronghold, but would spend the long winter here. He did not understand most of the reasons the prince had said, but he agreed with this decision from the bottom of his heart. Vanner's brother had died in the slums of Longsong Stronghold 2 years ago. There was no food for a whole month. He relied on the few copper coins he earned from unloading goods at the dock to buy some black bread to share with his brother. But it was too cold that winter, and the shacks in the slums were filled with air. This little bit of food couldn't even keep his body warm. After his brother fell ill and fell into a coma, he never woke up. In Border Town, at least he had a house made of mud bricks, so he didn't have to worry about the heavy snowfall for several days. He also saw that the dock was full of wheat from other places, which was being moved into the castle in batches. Therefore, when Vanner heard the news that the fourth prince was recruiting militia, he immediately rushed over. Of course, the reason that tempted him to give up his gravel work and immediately come to apply for the job was the monthly salary of 10 silver royals. This was already comparable to a skilled clay craftsman. He was not young anymore. Next spring, he planned to marry the tavern maid Cheryl, so he had to save more money. As for what the militia was supposed to do, he didn't pay attention to it at all. Anyway, they were either carrying things for the nobles or helping the patrols. They would not climb up the wall to fight against the crazy demonic beasts. The screening process was quite strict, and the eyes of the shining armor knight made Vanner feel a little scared. Fortunately, his sturdy physique passed the inspection. Many other scrawny fellows were dragged out of the team by the knights. In the end, there were only 100 people who came to apply for the job. But Vanner never expected that the one who would train them would be His Royal Highness himself. Those who passed were taken to the grassland in the west of Border Town. Behind them was the city wall that was being built, and in front of them was the endless concealing forest. The prince ordered everyone to stand in line, and then went to the side to rest. It had just rained a few days ago, so the ground was still wet with mud. The water seeped into the soles of his feet through the seams of his shoes, which made him feel uncomfortable. Not to mention that the prince had asked them to stand in an unusual way. Their hands had to be vertically attached to the sides of their thighs, and their backs had to be straight. Vanner only stood for a quarter of an hour before he felt exhausted. This was even harder than using a sledgehammer to break stones. But he gritted his teeth and tried to hold on, because His Royal Highness had said that whoever moved would lose an egg for lunch. My God, he hadn't tasted an egg for a long time. Apparently, the people around him also thought the same. Although they staggered, most of them persisted, until the prince announced that they would rest on the spot. Vanner found that his back was full of sweat, and the whole time he stood was not long, at most half an hour. Those who didn't persist until the end were annoyed, as if they could see the round eggs getting away from them. But Vanner didn't quite understand. What was the use of them practicing this? Could they carry more bags of dry food just by standing? If it weren't for His Royal Highness who was training them, he would have already shouted. He didn't expect that after a short rest, His Royal Highness would announce a second order that was even stranger. He asked everyone to continue to stand in line, and this time, if no one moved, they would all have an extra egg for lunch. As long as one person gave up, everyone would lose the opportunity to have an extra egg. Vanner heard the sound of people swallowing their saliva. Hell, is this a popular trick among the nobles of the kingdom? Using a carrot to make everyone run around in circles. He's not a stupid donkey. But in case everyone could do it, wouldn't they have 2 eggs to eat? Chapter 26. Your Royal Highness, what are you doing? Carter had thought that Prince Roland was just arbitrary, but now he thought that he was being whimsical. When it came to training a soldier, the chief knight felt that no one was more professional than him. His family had a complete training method. From the age of 10 to 15, it only took 5 years for a soldier to be proficient in all kinds of weapons. If he had another 5 years, he would be a knight who was familiar with the etiquette of the upper class. Of course, the trainee must not be a civilian. Look at these idiots, they only have food in their eyes. Moreover, eggs are very expensive, okay? Roland picked his ears and said, just watch. Remember, the training in the next few days should also be carried out according to this method. Of course, There will be some changes in the details, and I will list them one by one on the paper. In the era of cold weapons, a group of qualified soldiers could be trained in 2 or 3 months. Roland did not have this idea at all, and he did not need Spartan warriors who could tear beasts with only underpants. The individual fighting power of the army could not be strong, but they must be disciplined and strictly executed. Most of the time, the strength of a team was greater than that of an individual, which was determined by the social attribute of people. To achieve this quickly, it was probably a good choice to use the military training method and improve it according to the current environment. From his personal experience, it only took him half a month to integrate students from all over the country into a whole. No matter what the process was, the effect was still very obvious. When this group of people thoroughly understood what discipline was, Roland could carry out the next step of the plan. Vanner finally did not get the second egg. This time, the time for standing was twice as long as the previous time, until someone's legs became weak, and he could not help but shake from side to side. At this time, Prince Roland announced a rest and ordered the attendants to serve lunch. This successfully diverted people's anger towards the offenders to the food, but it also made Vanner suspect that His Royal Highness did not intend to let them get the second reward. The lunch was packed in 4 large pots and dragged by several carriages to the outside of the town. In addition to food, the carriages also carried many wooden pots and spoons. When Vanner licked his lips and was ready to rush up, the chief knight stopped in front of everyone. His Royal Highness ordered everyone to line up in 4 columns and come up one by one to receive their cutlery. Anyone who disturbed the order would be forced to be the last to receive their food. The crowd squeezed into 4 lines. He was lucky enough to be at the front of the outermost line. Of course, there were also people who expressed strong dissatisfaction with this, and there was a commotion among the team. Soon, the knight and a few guards rushed into the crowd and chased the troublemakers out. Vanner glanced at the leader of the troublemakers, Crazy Fist, the most aggressive man in the town. Usually, he relied on his brute strength to stir up trouble everywhere. But now, he had to obediently squat to the side with a sword pointed at him. Look at his pitiful appearance. He felt that he had figured out His Highness' preferences. That was uniformity. They had to stand in a straight line. They also had to line up for meals. The order could not be interrupted. Vanner had heard from a knowledgeable businessman in a big town that some nobles had a strange hobby, which was to put everything in order. If there was anything wrong, they would force themselves to tidy it up. In Vanner's mind, this kind of person was purely idle and had nothing to do, so they deliberately looked for some trouble to torment themselves. He didn't expect His Royal Highness to be such a person. When the lid of the earthen jar was opened, Vanner smelled a strong aroma. He was almost intoxicated by the fragrant aroma. There was a commotion in the crowd, and at the same time, the roar of His Excellency the Knight came from the front. I probably have to line up again, he thought. Sure enough, Prince Roland asked everyone to line up to receive their food in the same order as when they got the wooden basin and spoon. Although everyone swallowed their saliva and their stomachs were growling, in view of Crazy Fist's example, everyone still lined up obediently. The earthen jar was filled with hot wheat porridge. Vanner was surprised to find that there was jerky in the porridge. Although there was only a thin piece of jerky in the wooden basin, it was still meat. After scooping the porridge, he also got an extra egg as he wished. Vanner almost wolfed down his lunch, and even licked the bottom of the basin. He didn't even have time to bite the egg, and directly swallowed it into his stomach. Because he ate too fast, he accidentally scalded his tongue. Putting down the wooden basin, Vanner patted his stomach and burped. He hadn't enjoyed such delicious food for a long time. What was even more incredible was that he actually felt full. The sweetness of the meat porridge was like heaven and earth compared to the black bread. He even thought, if he could eat such food every day, even if he had to fight against demonic beasts in the front line, it wouldn't matter. After eating, there was a long rest time. Everyone was brought back to the city wall and walked all the way to the camp where the patrols lived in the town. A burly alien man came out from the team and began to teach them how to set up tents. Vanner knew him. There were few people who lived in the old street who didn't know Iron Axe. His superb archery made even the most experienced old hunter in the town gasp in amazement. Wait, Iron Axe was now working for Prince Roland? It seemed that he had seen him staying with the knight before. Vanner frowned. What was His Highness thinking? He was a sandman. Are you really going to appoint a sandman as the captain? Carter had the same question. He doesn't belong to Grey Castle. And he doesn't even belong to the mainland kingdom. Witches don't belong to Grey Castle either, Roland said disapprovingly. But they all belong to Border Town. Besides, aren't you here to look after them? But Your Highness, don't worry. Roland patted the knight's shoulder. Border Town doesn't care about their origin. As long as they don't violate the laws of the kingdom, they are still my people. If you are really worried, you can choose 2 more outstanding captains. Anyway, the number of people in this team will expand in the future, so it's not bad to train a few more people with potential. By the way, I have already written the training regulations. Compared to the Sandmen, I think it's better for you to pay more attention to this. Carter took the parchment scroll from Roland's hand and read it from beginning to end. He was suddenly dumbfounded. These training contents were simply unheard of. For example, taking everyone to run laps around Border Town in the afternoon, from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until the sun went down. The regulations emphasized that everyone had to complete this task, and they were allowed to help each other. If no one gave up, an extra egg would be added to the dinner. Another example was to blow the whistle at night when the wolves passed, so that everyone could put on their clothes and gather in the shortest time possible. With this kind of tossing and turning, I'm afraid the team will disperse in a few days. If the first few rules were slightly understandable, the last one made Carter completely confused. Every day after dinner, everyone will go to Mr. Carr's academy to receive cultural training. Your Highness, what do you mean by cultural training? Are you going to teach them to read and write? I hope so, but the time is too short. At most, I can only teach them some simple words and numbers, so that they can read and write commands. I will personally explain this to Carr. You just need to take them there. But, why do you want to do this? This is of no help in the fight against the demonic beasts. Chapter 27. The weather was getting colder day by day, and Roland also got up later and later. As the ruling class, he certainly had the right to sleep late, especially the big bed with 3 layers of velvet blankets. When he lay down, his whole body would be surrounded by softness, which encouraged him to stay in bed. When Roland finished washing up and walked into the office, Nightingale was already there waiting for him. Well, your breakfast. I ate half of it while it was still hot, and now it's cold. She pointed at the half of the bread on the table, as if she was the owner of the place. Didn't anyone teach you to be humble in front of the prince? Roland reached out his hand to push away the plate and sat back at the desk. I remember that at the beginning you were still very polite. He sighed from the bottom of his heart. He really didn't see that this girl was actually a familiar person, not accompanying Anna, but running to his office to stroll around. Before, she would hide her figure, but now, as long as there were no outsiders, she would openly wander around the office, even without a hood. Like this. She jumped off the table and bowed impeccably. You have been getting up later and later recently. I saw that breakfast was just sitting there, so I helped you a little. Your Highness. She moved closer to Roland. Anyway, you don't care, right? And you don't like those cumbersome etiquette, I can see that. Do you have the heaven's eye? Roland thought. You can see that? He sighed. Do as you please, but after you eat breakfast, you must finish it. If I want to eat again, I will order another. Yes, Your Highness. She smiled gently, picked up the plate and ran to the side. Roland spread out a blank piece of parchment, ready to complete the design drawing that he had drawn yesterday. If he wanted to defend Border Town, the battle after the arrival of winter could not be a Pyrrhic victory. Although an army that had not seen blood was not a qualified army, Roland was worried that if there was a big loss, this group of people who had been trained for a short time would not have the courage to stand on the wall. He needed a revolutionary weapon to gain an absolute advantage over the demonic beasts. Without a doubt, it was a musket. In fact, this era already had all the conditions for firearms to appear. Alchemists often made a substance known as snow powder, which was used in court ceremonies. This thing was gunpowder with the wrong formula. It burned slowly, and when it was put into a copper tube, it would only make a sound. In about another 100 years, the prototype of the flintlock gun, would appear. Due to the cumbersome operation of this firearm, it required the cooperation of 2 people to complete the loading and firing action. Under normal circumstances, it could only be used as a single-shot weapon. Moreover, its firing speed and power were inferior to that of a well-trained archer. Of course, Roland wasn't interested in repeating history. Just like the steam engine, he could use the witch's ability to create a gun with actual combat value. I looked at the order on the table before you came. Nightingale swallowed the last piece of bread and asked casually, "Why do you plan to buy so many ice rays? It's winter now. If you want to drink chilled ale, why don't you just leave it outside for the night?" The upper nobles like to use ice ray, or saltpeter, to make ice in the summer, and then cool down their milk, wine or fruit juice. Thanks to the season, the purchase price of saltpeter was very low. To make ice cheese, the current temperature is not low enough. It needs to be frozen, Roland said. Although the woman in front of him wasn't an enemy, he didn't know everything about her like Anna did. Unlike the steam engine, the musket didn't have many technical barriers. Once it was spread, it would obviously be detrimental to his farming plan. Before he understood her details, it was better to hide some things from her. Thinking of this, he tentatively asked, "In addition to searching for the Holy Mountain, is the Witch Cooperation Association also responsible for training killers?" "No, they are just a group of poor people gathered together for a dream." Nightingale waved her hand. "I joined the Witch Cooperation Association only 2 years ago." "In other words, you were working for someone else before?" Her beautiful throwing skills couldn't have been thrown without several years of hard practice. Roland was very sure of this. "In addition to me, there are other people willing to take in witches." "Taken?" Nightingale's expression became a little strange. "How could it be? If he knew that I would become a witch, he wouldn't even let me through the door. As for later, if I wasn't still useful to him, I'm afraid I would have already been secretly executed." "Oh, can you tell me about it?" Nightingale smiled and shook her head, but this time there were some unknown emotions in her smile. "Your Royal Highness, when the time is right, I will tell you. I know what you are worried about. Please rest assured. I was already free 5 years ago. I don't need to work for anyone anymore." Negotiation failed. It seems that my charm attribute isn't high, but her answer also confirmed my thoughts. At least 5 years ago, she had done some things for someone that couldn't see the light of day. Fortunately, his use of Nightingale seemed to be a coincidence, and not like me, who intended to recruit witches. Roland didn't ask again. He lowered his head and continued to draw his own drawings. To his slight surprise, Nightingale, who usually loved to come forward, had become quiet at the moment, and only the sound of the burning fire could be heard in the room. When Roland raised his head to move his sore neck, she had already disappeared from the office. "She left without saying a word," he muttered, folded the parchment in his hand, and put it in his pocket. After a few days of busy work, with this drawing, the design of the weapon, or rather the reproduction, was completely completed. The weapon he planned to make was the famous flintlock. This weapon had been tested by history for a long time, and its production difficulty was similar to that of a matchlock. The rear was loaded with gunpowder, the front was loaded with lead, and the firing rate was close to 3 shots per minute, which was more than enough to deal with mutant beasts without any IQ. Most animals couldn't climb walls, so the shooting distance was about the height from the top of the wall to the ground, which was 12 feet. At this distance, even if you aimed with your feet, you wouldn't miss the target, and the bullet's initial speed was almost unaffected. As long as the demonic beasts didn't evolve to be harder than steel, they could basically be killed with 1 shot. The shortcoming of the flintlock was the production time. At the beginning, it was the same as a matchlock, which required the craftsman to hammer it out. From the barrel to the trigger, the entire production of the gun would take about 3 months. The barrel was the big part, and the iron plate had to be beaten into a round tube. Iron powder was used to seal the mouth, and then the barrel was drilled to engrave the firing line. Although it didn't require any sophisticated equipment, the craftsman had to be skilled to make a qualified barrel. This was also the reason why Roland had to first build a steam engine. Chapter 28. However, when Roland personally operated it, he found that the actual situation was far from as simple as he thought. After working in the backyard for 4 or 5 days, he successfully produced a hard drill. Using Anna's high-temperature flame, he could easily obtain molten iron, with a temperature of more than 1,500 degrees. Without the restriction of temperature, the conventional method of frying steel could easily and quickly produce a small batch of steel. That was to use an iron rod to quickly stir the molten iron, so that the excess carbon and other impurities in the pig iron were fully exposed to the air and oxidized. After several repetitions, the molten iron cooled down to obtain high-quality steel. The problem lay in the steam engine. When the prototype was working, the noise and vibration were very alarming. Even the drill could not steadily drill a complete iron pipe. This level of tremor was insignificant when doing heavy work, but it was obviously not feasible when processing a gun barrel. To improve this, he had to first create a centrifugal governor to control the steam engine's output power, and then use a gear combination to reduce the vibration and adjust the rotation rate of the drill. But processing the gear required a simple lathe. In this way, Roland found that he had no way to achieve this goal before the months of the demons. In the end, he could only use the old way, relying on the blacksmith's hands to hammer it out. The plan to mass-produce guns was a failure. According to the number of blacksmiths in Border Town, at most they could produce 3 to 4 barrels a month. And this was under the condition that they stopped building the second steam engine. The only good news was that they didn't have to worry about the quality of the barrels. The blacksmith only needed to hammer out a roughly round pipe, and then Anna would uniformly sew it. The effect was close to that of a seamless boring pipe, which basically eliminated the risk of explosion. Roland had no choice but to modify his previous plan. He originally intended to recruit the hunters of Border Town to form a gun team. Most of them were proficient in archery. Whether it was a bow or a crossbow, they were both handy weapons. In addition, firearms training was not time-consuming, so they could quickly gain combat effectiveness. But now during the months of the demons, at most 4 flintlocks could be made, so he could only select the most outstanding hunters to create an elite team. Roland decided to give this task to Iron Axe, who had been in Border Town for 15 years and was recognized as the best hunter. Brian was not happy for the past 2 weeks. Especially when they met the militia on the street, the unhappiness would be magnified, and there would even be a trace of unwillingness in their hearts. He felt that he had been forgotten by His Highness. A month ago, when he was summoned by the chief knight, he was filled with excitement. To be in close contact with the fourth prince, and to be personally questioned by His Highness, was such a fortunate and glorious thing. He had grown up in Border Town. Although he came from an ordinary hunter family, he had relied on his own ability to become a patrol captain. He knew that he couldn't rely on his family to become a knight, so he could only wait for an opportunity to make contributions and receive the title of a superior. His Royal Highness's question made him feel that his opportunity had come. Obviously, the fourth Prince Roland was not willing to give up his territory. He was trying to find a way to fight against the demonic beasts. Later, the wantonly construction of the city wall also proved this point. There was no doubt that this year they would spend the months of the demons in Border Town. If they wanted to stop the invasion of the demonic beasts here, they had to form a team that dared to fight head-on. Brian thought that he was the best candidate. He was proficient in reconnaissance, swordsmanship and horsemanship. Every year, he stayed behind to light the beacon, proving that he didn't lack courage. But he never expected that His Highness would choose a team of civilians to fight against the demonic beasts. That's right, a pure civilian team. Not only him, but the entire patrol team of 10 people didn't pass the Chief Knight's examination. This was simply incredible. Did His Highness think that this group of people who had never held a sword would be better at fighting than him? I'm afraid that if they saw the fierce appearance of the demonic beasts, they would be defeated. But His Highness seemed to be serious. He not only trained this motley crew, but also gave them a uniform. Every afternoon, Brian could see this group of people wearing brown and gray leather armor, running through the street in two columns. At the beginning, the team was sparse, but recently it had become more and more orderly. But Brian himself was still carrying out boring tasks every day, and he couldn't see any hope of promotion. At night, when he couldn't sleep, he heard a noise next door. Then the door was pushed open and someone quietly came in. "Hey, get up," the person whispered. Brian recognized the other side's voice. It was a member of the patrol team, nicknamed Fierce Scar. There were 5 people sleeping in his room, except for himself and Greyhound. The other 3 quickly turned over and got up, as if they were already prepared. They didn't even take off their coats. "Captain, get up. I have something important to tell you." Fierce Scar had a noble relative in Longsong Stronghold, and he heard that he was a great noble, so his position in the team was very high. Brian couldn't ignore him, so he got up and asked, "What's the matter?" Greyhound was also woken up. It's so late, you don't sleep?" "I have a good job to introduce to you. Do you want to be conferred the title of knight?" What? Knight?" Greyhound was surprised. Brian's heart jumped. He quickly asked, "In the end, what kind of job is it?" "You all know my Uncle Hill. He is the Earl of the Duke. He is also His Excellency's confidant. He told me this news personally," Fierce Scar said in a low voice. "The 4th Prince is ready to leave Longsong Stronghold alone," which made the Duke very unhappy. He decided to let the prince know, who is the master of the Western Territory. Difficult, don't tell me you plan to assassinate." Greyhound was nervous. He stuttered even more. A short sentence could not be completed for a long time. "How is that possible?" Fierce Scar sneered. "He is a prince. If he dies, even the Duke can't protect us. I said this is a good job." Brian subconsciously felt that this deal was certainly not as simple as he claimed, but the temptation of being conferred the title of knight was too big. He couldn't help but open his mouth. "Let's hear it." "Food. Without food, he can only obediently roll back to Longsong Stronghold. This job was promised by the Duke. As long as we can successfully burn the food bought by the 4th Prince, he will hold a knighthood ceremony for us, and also give us a fief in the east of Longsong Stronghold. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Captain. What do you think?" You are crazy. Didn't His Highness say, this year, the months of the demons is likely to last for more than 4 months. If you burn the food, what will we eat?" Greyhound shook his head again and again. Two years ago, have you forgotten? What does it have to do with us?" Another person said disdainfully. "Anyway, I don't intend to stay here. Duke Ryan's matter. We can live a comfortable life in Longsong Stronghold." "Yes. Do you want to eat slag in this damn place for a lifetime?" The others also chimed in one after another. Hell, they had already colluded. Brian's heart turned cold. Except for Greyhound and himself, who grew up in Border Town. Most of them came from all over the kingdom. They simply didn't have any nostalgia for the town. Seeing that he was powerless to stop them, he had to change the topic. "But the wheat has been transferred to His Highness Castle. The door is guarded by His Highness' personal knight. How can you get in?" "That's why I called you," Fierce Scar proudly said. "You have been living in this broken place since you were a child. No one is more familiar with the environment here than you. I remember you once said that there is an abandoned well in the ravine behind the castle, which is connected to the waterway under the castle. Through it, you can quietly reach the castle garden. Didn't you climb in when you were a child? How about it? If you do this with me, in the future you can also become a knight personally appointed by His Excellency the Duke." "No, a knight should have the courage to fight against injustice, should not be afraid of power, and should protect the weak. Just because of His Excellency the Duke's personal grievances, he should ignore the threat of starvation and death for the residents of Border Town? Such a knight, in addition to being an empty shell, what glory does he have to speak of?" He was about to open his mouth to refuse, but Greyhound had already barked. A group of madmen. You actually dare to take the idea of food. I will never let you leave here. I will report to Cough," Greyhound said halfway. His voice suddenly froze. He incredulously turned his head. A former teammate was standing behind him, sneering at him. A black dagger was inserted from behind Greyhound's waist. The dagger was completely inserted into his body. He trembled twice, opened his mouth to say something, but could only let out a hoarse breath sound. The other side stirred the dagger twice, and then fiercely pulled it back. Greyhound suddenly lost his support like a rag doll, softly paralyzed on the ground. Chapter 29. The castle of the Lord of Border Town was not built in its current location. At first, when the foundation of the stone wall was buried, it encountered an underground cave, and the ground suddenly collapsed, so it had to be moved. Most of the channels that had been dug were destroyed in the collapse, and even if they were intact, they were abandoned because of reconstruction. When Brian was young, he often drilled in these tunnels, and one day he accidentally found a route from an abandoned well to the well in the castle garden. Brian told this news to his father, and the result was that he was hung up and severely beaten. His father warned him that trespassing into the Lord's castle was a capital crime, and once discovered, he could only be hanged. The frightened Brian naturally did not go through this channel, but when everyone gathered together to drink and chat, he had more than once boasted that he had the ability to go directly to the castle. Now he simply regretted it. In addition to Greyhound, there were a total of 9 people. In other words, the whole patrol team was convinced by Fierce Scar to be able to work for the Lord of the Western region of the kingdom, Duke Ryan. And with such a generous reward, there were only a few people who could resist such a temptation. The abandoned well was the first place where the collapse began, and now it was still a wasteland. Fierce Scar held Brian's sword in the middle of the team and went down the well. When he was young, the channel was spacious, but now it seemed very narrow, because there was no one passing through it all year round, and the water had changed course. Many places in the cave had grown vines. The guy who stabbed Greyhound was holding a torch and walking in the front, holding a short-handled axe to clear the obstacles. Brian pretended to recall the road, but in his heart he was thinking of a way to escape. Obviously, in such a place where movement was extremely inconvenient, he had no possibility of escape. Only when he arrived at the castle could he get a chance. What should he do then? Shout twice to attract His Highness's guards? No. That way Scar only needed to raise his hand to kill him. He must first pull away. Otherwise he would end up like Greyhound. Thinking of Greyhound, Brian's eyes dimmed a bit. Before the establishment of Border Town, he and Brian lived here, and the two almost grew up playing together. Joining the patrol team together was also Brian's idea. Unexpectedly, he was elected as the captain of the patrol team, just like himself. Brian was happy for him for a long time. Because of his stuttering, Greyhound had always been looked down upon. Now he finally had a chance to be acknowledged, at least, that was what Brian thought at the time. But when Greyhound fell, Brian roared at Fierce Scar. Fierce Scar, with a face full of sarcasm, told him the reason why everyone recommended him and Greyhound to be elected as captain. Idiot. The patrol captain has to stay until the months of the demons, and light the beacon to alert the others. If I don't let you do it, do I have to take this risk? These words pierced Brian's heart like a sharp knife. It turned out that all that modesty, all those congratulations were just a facade of hypocrisy. The real reason was so ugly. He revealed an expression of shock and despair, to cover up the anger surging in his heart. This was unforgivable. Brian clenched his teeth. Someone had to pay the price. After walking through the dried-up sewer for about an hour, the group finally heard the sound of flowing water. This meant that they were not far from their destination. After turning a corner, the area ahead suddenly became much more spacious. It could accommodate 2 people standing side by side. The person walking at the front of the team said, "There is no road ahead, there is a shaft." "What's the matter?" Fierce Scar asked with his sword. "Tell him to look up," Brian said in a deep voice. "We have arrived." This abandoned sewer was connected to the middle of the well in the backyard of the castle. At the time of repair, it may have been due to negligence, but this interface was not sealed. Fierce Scar stuck his head to the wall of the well and looked down. 3 feet under his feet was the rushing water, and above his head, he could see a small circle of the night sky. He let someone look after Brian, took out a bundle of rope from his backpack, tied the hook, and gently threw it up. Only to hear a sound. The hook was firmly stuck on the edge of the well mouth. Fierce Scar followed the rope and carefully climbed out. Soon, he pulled the rope above, motioning the people behind to keep up. It took a long time for the group to climb out of the well. Originally they could only see the castle from afar, but now it stood in front of them. Fierce Scar grabbed Brian and said in a low voice, "Take us to the warehouse." Brian had only been here once. Although his memory of the castle was blurred, he still quietly led the group, pried open the lock of the wooden door closest to the well, and drilled into the castle. At this time, most of the people in the castle had fallen asleep, and the oil lamps hanging on the walls of the aisle had all been extinguished. In the darkness, someone in the team lit a fire. The weak fire could only illuminate the nearby area of a few feet. Brian knew that the opportunity he was waiting for had come. When the team came to a fork in the road leading to the basement, he aimed at the stairs that extended downwards and suddenly pounced over. Although the person guarding Brian had been paying attention to his movements, this leap was too fast. Before he could react, the person let out a muffled groan and was knocked down together with Brian. Falling down the stairs, the two people instantly left the range of the fire and disappeared into the darkness. Damn it! Fierce Scar immediately pulled out his dagger and jumped to chase after them. He thought that Brian would use the darkness to play hide and seek with him. He did not expect that the other party did not escape, but stood quietly at the bottom of the stairs, as if waiting for him. Fierce Scar noticed that his accomplice was lying motionless on the ground, and in Brian's hand was that man's weapon. "Idiot, do you think you have a chance to win?" Fierce Scar maintained a vigilant posture, waiting for the others to come down before he snapped. "We still have 7 people, and you only have 1. Brian did not answer. He no longer needed to suppress his anger. He raised his sword and slashed, as fast as lightning, fiercely chopping Fierce Scar's sword edge, sparks bursting out. Not waiting for the other side to assume the next round of posture, his straight stab had already pierced Fierce Scar's shoulder. Fierce Scar screamed in pain and fell back. Another person stepped forward and blocked Brian's pursuit. This was an excellent place to attack. The narrow aisle made it impossible for the opponent to play their advantage in numbers. As long as he stood in the middle of the aisle and faced the enemy, the other side would not be able to do anything. This place could not accommodate 2 people side by side wielding their weapons. In terms of swordsmanship, Brian was confident that he would not lose to anyone in the patrol team. When this group of scum was lazy, gambling, and indulging in the bar, he was still honing his fighting skills. Regardless of the wind, frost, rain, and snow, he had not stopped for several years. This was also the reason why he did not choose to immediately shout for help. Chapter 30. The person who replaced Brian was only able to catch 2 swords, and then his weapon was directly sent flying. Rather than saying that they were part of the patrol team, it would be better to say that they were a group of gangsters. Brian thought angrily. In addition to extortion and blackmail, what have these people done? He and Greyhound had meticulously executed the task given by the Lord, and had become an anomaly in the team. But it was this group of waste. In order to rely on the stronghold, they did not hesitate to harm the town, and killed Greyhound, using extremely despicable means. Unforgivable. He brandished his sword to chop the neck of his frightened opponent. At this moment, a shadow pierced out from under the target, and in the blink of an eye it was close to Brian's heart. This attack was too hidden, and when he noticed it, it was already too late to block. In desperation, he fiercely kicked the ground, and his body bounced back. At the same time, he felt a stabbing pain in his chest. After rolling 2 laps, Brian stood up and immediately put on a defensive posture. The sneak attack just now had only pierced his coat and skin, but fortunately it was not a big deal. The key was the person who stabbed him. In his impression, there was no one in the patrol team who had such swordsmanship. "Hey, you actually dodged." The man pushed away his teammate who had lost his weapon, and step by step came forward. Under the light of the fire, Brian found out that he did not know the other person. He was not tall, but his hands were too long, and if they hung down they would almost reach his knees. His face was also unfamiliar, and Brian swore that he had never seen such a face. You are not a member of the patrol. Who are you? Although he did not have much contact with the 5 people next door, but he always recognized them. The guy in front of him had obviously replaced one of them and followed the team into the castle. It was not surprising that he did not find him in the middle of the night, but it was impossible for Fierce Scar to not find him. Since they were not surprised, then there was only one explanation. This guy was deliberately arranged by Fierce Scar. You have already guessed the answer, why ask me? He smiled indifferently. Anyway, you are going to die soon. Damn, he hurt me, Fierce Scar hatefully said. Viper, quickly cut off his hands and feet. I want to slowly drain his blood. I'm sorry, Mr. Sills. I must complete the mission given by the Earl first. Before he could finish his sentence, the guy known as Viper approached him. The angle of his attack was tricky and strange. Coupled with his extremely long arm span, Brian fell into a bitter struggle. He was forced to retreat again and again, unable to find a chance to fight back. I was too careless. Brian was a little anxious. They had been fighting in the underground passageway for so long. The people above should have noticed, right? Originally he planned to personally take revenge for Greyhound, but now he only hoped to hold on for a little longer, waiting for His Royal Highness Personal Guard Knight to come and encircle this group of villains. He seemed to be expecting something. Viper suddenly paused his attack. I'm guessing you're waiting for the prince's men to come and save you? Unfortunately, this kind of stone castle was different from the usual taverns and hotels. The entire floor of the house made of wooden frames would creak when someone was having fun. As long as the door is closed, even if you yell at the top of your lungs, they won't hear anything. Brian couldn't help but stare blankly. Viper was waiting for this opportunity. He kept his sword in a downward position to paralyze his opponent. His other hand was slightly raised, and he pulled the trigger of the crossbow hidden in his sleeve. An index finger-long arrow was shot from his sleeve. Brian only heard the soft buzzing sound of the bowstring. The arrow had already entered his lungs. An unbearable pain exploded in his chest. Brian threw his sword at the snake that was pouncing on him, turned around and ran away. But the blood that leaked from his lungs quickly rushed into his trachea, making it difficult for him to breathe. He didn't run far when Brian tripped on the threshold and fell heavily to the ground. Viper quickly caught up, wanting to end his opponent, but he was stopped by Fierce Scar. Let me do it, he gnashed his teeth and said. I want this guy to know the consequences of stabbing me. Viper's face flashed a trace of coldness, but in the end he stepped aside and said, Do it quickly, don't forget our business. Fierce Scar grabbed Brian's hair and growled at him. Believe me, you will die a painful death. Brian wanted to spit a mouthful of blood on his opponent's face, but his whole body's strength flowed out like water. He knew that he didn't have long to live. The regrets of the past rushed into his heart, such as the wife he didn't know, such as the night dream that couldn't be realized. But the most regretful thing was, he couldn't avenge Greyhound. Wait, what is that? He blinked and saw a woman sitting on the box in front of him. Although in the dim light, he couldn't see the other person's appearance clearly, but the exquisite figure showed that she was undoubtedly a woman. Hell, is this an illusion? When he fell into the room, he didn't see anyone inside. Did the gods in heaven hear his complaints and deliberately create an illusion to comfort him? Hey, you guys are fighting in other people's territory, and you still want to kill people in front of me. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right? Brian felt Fierce Scar's hand tremble, and he suddenly let go of his hair. The sound of weapons being unsheathed came from all around, and several people shouted at the same time. Who are you? Their reaction was too. Wait, Brian's consciousness was hazy. Was what he saw not an illusion? Of course, I'm from here. The woman jumped down from the barrel, bent down and patted the dust on her robe. In the dim light of the fire, Brian saw a strange pattern embroidered on her robe, 3 juxtaposed triangles, and a huge eye embedded in the center. The outline of the eye reflected a little golden light under the illumination of the fire. What about you? Did you sneak in from the gutter? Her voice was crisp and sweet, but without any emotion. This is not common sense. No one should be so calm when seeing a murder scene. Viper was also aware of this. His expression was dignified. He slowly circled to the side of the other person, and suddenly raised his sword to stab. The woman didn't even turn her head. She lightly waved her hand. Viper didn't even see her weapon. He only felt a cold wind brushing his body. With a scream, Fierce Scar couldn't believe his eyes. He saw Viper rush forward and quickly retreat. The place where he originally held the sword was empty. His arm, along with the sword, fell to the ground. Fear suddenly clutched Fierce Scar's throat. Others may not know, but he was very clear about Viper's background. Ruthless, cunning, and dangerous. This was the Earl's evaluation of this person. The strength of the people who could be recruited by the Earl was absolutely not to be underestimated. Even Brian found it difficult to survive under his attack for half a quarter of an hour. But now, he was carelessly struck by a woman, and his whole arm was cut off. "What are you doing? Quickly go and kill her," Viper shouted while holding his wound. Brian's vision began to blur due to excessive blood loss. He heard messy footsteps everywhere, the sound of weapons colliding, and the muffled sound of a human body falling to the ground. What the hell happened? He tried to move his eyes, looking forward. Then the patrol captain saw a scene he couldn't understand. The figure of the woman was like a ghost. She walked in the crowd, appearing and disappearing. Every time she attacked, she would penetrate the enemy's vital point. Rather than killing, it was better to say that she was dancing. He had never seen anyone who could wield a killing weapon with such a sense of rhythm. The sword flew up and down, drawing an incredible trajectory. In comparison, the surrounding people were just a group of clumsy clowns. They fought back in vain, and fell down in vain. Eventually, she was the only one left standing proudly. Chapter 31. Roland sat in front of his desk in a daze. He did not expect that someone would actually dare to kill his way into the castle. If not for Nightingale's timely discovery, he was afraid that he would have already been killed. Who was it this time? The third princess, or some other brother and sister? Was there a need to be so anxious? The 5 years of the fight for the throne. Now only a few months have passed. Roland impatiently pounded the table. This is simply unreasonable. Can't they let me spend the winter peacefully? Outside the door came the sound of footsteps. Chief Knight Carter Lannis pushed open the door and entered. Your Royal Highness, the identities of the dead have been identified. 7 of the 8 corpses were originally members of the patrol team. The identity of one is unknown. The other 2 are still alive. One was treated by the witch, no, by Miss Pine, but he still hasn't woken up. The other one has been detained in the dungeon and is being closely guarded. Patrol team? I knew that this team raised by the former lord was unreliable. Roland thought while gnashing his teeth. Out of 10 people, 8 had betrayed him. Not allowing this group of people to join the militia was really the right choice. The one who is locked up, you tell your men to keep a close eye on him. Don't let him commit suicide like last time. Last time like that? Cough, nothing. Roland shook his head. It seemed that after being woken up by Nightingale early in the morning, even his brain was confused. In short, I want to know everything from his mouth. Who is the mastermind? Who contacted him? Who bought him? I will leave all of these to you to investigate. Yes, Your Royal Highness. Carter did not immediately leave, but instead knelt down on one knee. This time, letting the assassins sneak into the castle was my negligence. I hope Your Royal Highness will punish me. Enough. You were not in the castle at the time. This has nothing to do with you. So, Carter hesitated. Can you tell me in the end, who was it that stopped this assassination? I saw from the scene the knight swallowed his saliva. They seemed to be killed by the same person, and they didn't even have the strength to fight back. You can tell? Roland asked curiously. If they were evenly matched, the scene wouldn't be so clean, and the wounds would be so varied, Carter said in a low voice. Everyone fell in a small warehouse. Aside from blood and corpses, there was almost no damage to any of the objects placed on the ground. The big boxes that stored the cured meat didn't even have a sword mark on them. In other words, that person did not use any cover and was wandering around in a small empty space. With all due respect, Your Highness, this is simply unbelievable. I see. Roland nodded. He understood what she meant. In theory, no matter how strong a person was, once he was surrounded, he would fall into an extremely disadvantageous situation. In actual combat, it would not be like what was shown in the movies, where it looked like an encirclement, but people would still fall one by one. An attack from a blind spot would be especially fatal. Therefore, in a one versus many situation, the correct strategy was to rely on the terrain and environment, allowing oneself to face the enemy head-on. However, Nightingale was no ordinary person. No matter what, go do what you have to do first. This person can't show up for the time being, but when the time is right, I will tell you. Although the chief knight was loyal and reliable to himself, and also knew that Anna and Nana were witches, Roland still chose to conceal the existence of Nightingale. Because she was different from the other two witches, she did not belong to his side, and the reason she stayed in Border Town was only for Anna. Behind her was the Witch Cooperation Association, and sooner or later, she would leave this place. Carter left with a disappointed look on his face. Roland could understand his thoughts. As a swordsman, he constantly practiced and accumulated swordsmanship for hundreds of years, and took it as the truth. But when he saw an incomprehensible scene, he was bound to doubt himself. If swordsmanship could be so exquisite, then what was the point of being so proud of? I thought you would call me out. Nightingale appeared. She was still sitting at the corner of the desk, and said with her legs crossed, I thought so too. Why don't you just settle down here, and work as my secret guard? You will get a monthly salary of 2 golden dragon, which is twice as much as Anna. Do you want to consider it? Roland began to persuade her. The house has a garden, 2 days off a week, and every year you will get paid leave. Well, it means that you will get paid while you rest. To his surprise, this time the other didn't flatly refuse, but instead smiled and said, I can't abandon my partner. Then call them all. After the winter is over, Border Town will have a big construction, and when the time comes, we can accommodate as many people as we want. And witches can also walk on the streets without discrimination, and no one will think of you as evil. Wait until you achieve this, Nightingale said with a shrug. All right, Amway still depended on the product. This kind of thing could only be done slowly. Roland changed the subject. Has Nana been safely sent back? She was really scared. The prince sighed. He was woken up by Nightingale in the middle of the night, and after seeing the scene, he almost vomited. She briefly explained what had happened, and Roland ordered her to secretly bring Nana out. The little girl, who usually only treated chickens, saw a living person covered in blood, and immediately fainted. In short, after a lot of chaos, she was able to heal the patrol captain with a face full of tears. In order not to let his family know, Nightingale was also responsible for taking her back. When everything was finished, it was almost dawn. What do you think of this matter? Can you guess which of my good brothers or sisters did it? Nightingale shook her head. They are all patrol members. The only exception is that they didn't carry any evidence related to their identity. If it was a bribe, anyone can do it. But I think this matter may have nothing to do with your brother and sister. Why? Because it was too careless. It was an operation with many people, but there was internal strife in the team. After the failure, they didn't immediately commit suicide, and at least 2 people were left alive. And at that time, their performance was unprofessional, just like a street thug. This is not like the style of your brother and sister, but more like a layman's plan. I think even if I wasn't there, this assassination had no possibility of success. Don't forget that Anna is sleeping downstairs. Nightingale picked up Roland's cup, took a sip without a care, and then said, Anyway, your knight has gone to the dungeon to ask for a confession, and I bet he will soon know the truth. Compared to your sister's chess piece, that guy is much inferior. He was kneeling and begging me not to kill him. The seriously injured patrol captain. I seem to have seen him. Really? Nightingale tilted her head. I think you should thank him. If he hadn't entangled the other guys, I wouldn't have found out so quickly that there were rats in the basement. Although I don't know why he did it, the enemy of our enemy is our friend, right? That's right, Roland thought. But the point is not whether he is a friend or an enemy, but what Nightingale said. Chapter 32. When Brian woke up, the first thing that came into his eyes was the gray ceiling. The sunlight shining through the window was somewhat dazzling. He slightly closed his eyes, and then opened them again. The scene in front of him was still the same. It's not a dream, he thought. I am still alive? He tried to move his body, but found that he could only shake his fingers. His whole body seemed to be drained of strength. Then he heard someone shout. He woke up. Go and inform His Royal Highness. His Royal Highness? Brian felt that his brain was stuffed with paste. His thinking was much slower than usual. That's right, how did he faint? It seemed that he was stabbed in the chest by a poisonous snake, and was soon going to die. At the last moment, a ghostly woman suddenly appeared, and in an incredible way defeated all the enemies. Soon a maid reached out and lifted him up, sitting on the bed. Another person brought a basin of water, and helped him wash his face. Brian had obviously never experienced such thorough and personal service. In addition, he was surrounded by young maids, which made him feel somewhat at a loss. Fortunately, this awkwardness did not last long. When the fourth prince entered the room, everyone bowed down. Brian felt a surge of heat in his heart. He had too many questions to ask, but he did not know what to say first. Roland nodded and said, I already know about your deeds, Brian. You are a well-deserved hero. As soon as the word hero came out, Brian suddenly felt his eyes sour, and his voice choked. No, Your Royal Highness, my friend is the real. Roland patted his shoulder to comfort him. Just as Nightingale had predicted, after Fierce Scar was dragged to the torture chamber, he didn't even wait for the warden to make a move. Fierce Scar spilled everything he knew. The mastermind behind this team was not his royal brother or sister, but the Elk family of Longsong Stronghold. The Earl of Elk family contacted Hilmed, a distant relative, who was also Fierce Scar, and controlled most of the patrol team through temptation and division. In addition, he also sent a substitute to the team as insurance, in case of accidents during the operation. The purpose of this group of people was not to assassinate him, but to burn the pure grain, so that he would obediently go back to the stronghold. This conspiracy caused the death of an innocent person, Greyhound. He tried to stop Fierce Scar and his gang from committing a crime, but was stabbed to death by a patrol member with a dagger. The whereabouts of Viper's replacement team member were unknown. He probably discovered that the castle was not on fire in the morning, and Fierce Scar did not come back on time. After realizing that his plan had been exposed, he directly fled. When Brian finally calmed down, Roland said, Your friend Greyhound, he will receive a proper funeral. His family will also be properly settled, and he will no longer have to worry about food in the future. Thank you, Your Highness. Brian took a deep breath. May I ask, Fierce Scar, is he also dead? He's still alive. The patrol leader closed his eyes in agony. He would rather not be rescued than drag the other party to hell with him. But in this way, this hope had become slim. There was no doubt that Fierce Scar was guilty, but the crimes committed by nobles could be redeemed with money. As long as his uncle was willing to protect him, there was a great possibility that Fierce Scar would not die. Even he would not be sent to prison. Roland could naturally guess his thoughts. Hilsmed, who you call Fierce Scar, is a member of the Longsong Stronghold's Elk family. The head of the family is called Lochen Med, an Earl of the Duke Ryan, and is also his distant uncle. Here he paused a little, but this will not affect the final verdict. Fierce Scar has been sentenced to death by hanging, which will be carried out in 3 days. If your body can recover, you may wish to see it. Brian suddenly opened his eyes wide. But Your Highness, the nobles can use the golden dragon to atone for their crimes. You will not off dash, Roland waved his hand, motioning him to calm down. Nobles? Perhaps for you. He was born in the Elk family, and his status is different from yours. But in fact, he has neither a title nor a fief, and simply cannot be regarded as a noble. Second, even if he is a noble, he invaded the prince's summer palace, tried to burn the stored food, and disregarded the lives of more than 2,000 people in Border Town. These 3 evils add up to an unforgivable crime. If Tyr's death was something that Roland still hesitated about, then Fierce Scar's death was completely unforgivable. If Fierce Scar had succeeded, then his foundation in Border Town would have been destroyed, and he would never have the opportunity to rise again. This was much more abominable than a direct assassination. As for whether this reaction would anger Longsong Stronghold, who cared? Since the other side was not willing to do business with him, and chose to ruthlessly trap Border Town, of course, he could not back down. This incident also gave Roland a warning. This world's political struggles were not like the ones he was familiar with in the past. Most of them were concentrated under the table, but more inclined to the method of flipping the table, which was much more primitive and much more bloody. Have a good rest. You have lost too much blood, so don't leave the castle. I have already arranged for other people to carry out the work of the patrol team. And when the months of the demons is over, I will hold a ceremony for you. Your Highness. Hearing the last sentence, Brian could not believe it and looked at the prince. You mean? Yes, you will be my knight, Mr. Brian, Roland replied with a smile. Ready, stab. Vanner clenched his teeth and thrust the long wooden pole in his hand, using the same strength as the last time, and at the same angle. This was the 100th time he had thrust. His arm felt sore and numb, and Vanner felt that he could not hold on any longer. Although he had already thought so on the 50th time, after a week of training, he still obeyed the order. To be honest, even he himself was surprised that he could hold on until now. Everyone rest. After Iron Axe shouted the order, there was a sudden sigh of relief. Vanner was also relieved, put down the spear, and sat straight on the ground. Now he finally understood that the militia he was in was not responsible for running errands for the guards or the knight. After a week of strange training, their exercises gradually became decent. For example, now standing on the city wall, they stabbed and retracted their spears according to the command of the hunters. Although these spears were replaced by wooden poles, Vanner could quickly think of the role he had to play. Chapter 33. Stand up. His Highness the Fourth Prince is coming. Iron Axe clapped his hands and shouted before they had even rested for a quarter of an hour. Vanner quickly returned to his position. The previous special training had given him a conditioned reflex to obey orders. Almost subconsciously, he had already picked up the wooden stick and made the preparation for the previous stab. The prince and his entourage went up the wall and passed behind the troops. Vanner noticed that His Highness slowed down when he passed his position. Roland sighed in his heart. It was true that getting up late ruined the morning, and getting up early ruined the day. He had just finished dealing with the aftermath of the night attack on the castle, and now he had to come to review the results of the militia's recent training. Poor me, I didn't sleep all night, and now I'm sleepy. But I have to come. Now the militia has entered the stage of pre-battle training. As the Supreme Commander, if I don't show up for a long time, my sense of existence will decline, and the people will become unstable. What should I say during the review? Roland thought for a moment. Good morning, comrades, you've worked hard? If no one answered the second half, it would be very embarrassing to shout out this slogan. It would be better to find someone to talk about daily life, to show that I am polite to the wise, and to increase my reputation. With that in mind, he patted a rather sturdy-looking young man on the shoulder. You've worked hard, are you tired? Have you had a good meal? According to the experience from watching the news, the other side's reaction should be to excitedly answer, I'm not tired, very good. As a result, he was so excited that he turned around and directly knelt down on one knee, which scared Roland. Vanner felt that he was blessed by God. His Highness actually asked him if he was tired from the training in a friendly tone. Usually, not to mention the royal family, even the ordinary nobles were unwilling to say a word to them. He subconsciously imitated the knight and saluted to His Highness, regardless of whether this set of etiquette was suitable for him or not. There was only one voice in his heart. When I return to the old street, I, Vanner, will also be regarded as a person of importance. After being asked to stand up, Vanner was still confused, and he couldn't remember how to answer. Finally, when His Highness asked him if he had any opinions on the training, Vanner suddenly became sober. This was a good opportunity. If he could convince His Highness that the militia alone could not shoulder the heavy responsibility of guarding the city wall, he wouldn't have to worry all day about whether to run or stay. He carefully considered the words in his heart. Your Highness, there are too few people in the militia at present. According to their current formation, when the demonic beasts attacked, they would only be able to defend less than 1/3 of the city wall. Even if the prince were to recruit a few more batches, the training time would be too late, Vanner thought. In addition, the weapons used by these people were also a big expense. It would be very difficult for Border Town to gather enough spears for 300 people within 2 months. Even 100 would be very difficult. So they were still using wooden poles to train. If His Highness could realize this, he might recruit a group of mercenaries from other towns as the city. At the very least, they did not need to train, and could directly enter the battlefield. At the same time, they brought their own weapons and armor, but the price was higher. Roland thought for a moment and nodded. You're right. It's not realistic to rely on a militia to guard the entire city wall. Vanner was delighted. Does His Highness mean that he agrees with me? But Prince Roland did not say what he expected to hear. Instead, he called Iron Axe to his side. Demonic beasts are, in a sense, just a variant of beasts. They don't have the ability to think, do they? Yes, Your Highness. Ordinary demonic beasts are no different from wild beasts. Even their habits are basically the same. But I haven't seen many mixed demonic beasts, so I'm not sure. That's good. Although the distance from the Redwater River to the foot of the northern slope mountain is nearly 1,800 feet, 600 meters, long, we can lure them to attack a specific area. You mean setting a trap? Iron Axe asked. It's a trap, but it's not the kind hunters usually use. Ordinary traps relied on hiding themselves to catch their prey, but I intended to do the opposite. I would set up pocket roadblocks far away from the city walls, such as fences, slopes, and ditches, forcing these brainless demonic beasts to take a detour. The continuous obstacles will lead the prey to a specific location, and finally, they will be concentrated in the defensive area we have prepared. Roland looked at Iron Axe. As for how to lure these monsters, I think no one is better than you at it. Iron Axe thought for a moment. Leading them is not a problem. Wolves don't like to touch water. Wild boars are afraid of light, and other demonic beasts have their own habits. But Your Highness, if we do this, all the demonic beasts will be concentrated in this 600 feet range. Isn't it too dangerous? If we only relied on spears and bows, it would indeed be so, Roland confidently said. But now we have new weapons. When they left, the prince once again came behind Vanner and patted him on the shoulder. Good observation. What's your name? Vanner, Your Highness. I will propose to my chief knight to appoint you as the vice captain of the Lancer team. Mr. Vanner, do a good job. Roland built a new bungalow in the backyard of Duan Xiaofang, which was used to make snow powder. That is gunpowder. This 300 square meter room had only one entrance and exit, and the strictest security system was implemented. 2 knights guarded the door, and anyone who entered had to register and be searched to prevent bringing in any kindling. No fire was allowed inside, so they could only work during the day. In order to prevent Nightingale from sneaking in, the door frame was also hung with a gauze curtain. Is this the new weapon you mentioned? Carter, who had been summoned, picked up a little black powder with his fingers, put it in front of his nose and sniffed. Isn't this snow powder? Iron Axe might not know, but Carter often participated in royal ceremonies, so he naturally knew that this was the stuff in the ceremonial barrel. It was the proudest work of the alchemy workshop. The formula was a secret to outsiders, but if the prince wanted it, he would definitely get it. It's snow powder, but not exactly, Roland said. The alchemy workshop's latest improved product. I call it gunpowder. Gunpowder could be said to be an essential farming tool for any transmigrator. The materials came from a wide range of sources. As long as one knew the best ratio of charcoal, sulfur and saltpeter was 1:1.7:5, it could be produced without any technical barriers. In this era, the snow powder contained 60% charcoal, 20% sulfur and saltpeter, and 20% other strange materials, such as mercury, butter, honey, etc. It burned slowly and released little gas, so it was completely unable to play the role of gunpowder. But Roland knew that the alchemists were constantly experimenting with other ratios, and in 30 years at most, a snow powder that was closer to the standard formula of gunpowder would appear. In history, it took a long time after the invention of gunpowder before cold weapons were completely eliminated. This was because the formula and the corresponding weapon manufacturing process could not keep up. Chapter 34. As early as the construction of the cement firing room, Roland had made plans for the following projects. Most of them were built around the North Slope mine, so they could be effectively guarded. This kind of bungalow with brick walls and wooden roofs could be built very quickly, and it would not affect the progress of the city wall construction. The large amount of saltpeter purchased from Willowtown was transported to a nearby warehouse for storage. When it was time to use it, the servants would grind and weigh it, and then send it to the bungalow in batches. The same was true for charcoal and sulfur. The handling and mixing of the three raw materials were done by different groups of people, so as to minimize the risk of leakage. Roland weighed 20 pounds of black gunpowder and slowly poured it on a piece of sheepskin. The gunpowder had been soaked, compacted, dried, hammered, sifted, and other processes. It had a uniform size of particles, and its combustion performance was excellent. In order to prevent the collision of sparks and accidents, the whole production process did not use any metal utensils. Most of them were ceramic or wood products. After pouring the gunpowder, Roland folded the sheepskin layer by layer, wrapped it in 3 layers, and then tied it tightly with a rope. "Is this all right?" Carter asked. "Can this thing in front of us be called a weapon?" Although it was an improved version of snow powder, who could be scared by the sound? It might be effective against farmers who had never been on the battlefield, but any trained soldiers and mercenaries would not pay attention to it. But the chief knight thought carefully. What His Highness had done recently seemed unreasonable, but most of them had amazing effects. If the intelligence of demonic beasts was similar to that of wild beasts, perhaps this thing would be unexpectedly effective? For example, a loud noise would frighten them and make them scatter, thus reducing the pressure on the city guards and so on. Roland put the wrapped gunpowder into Carter's arms, and then took a bag of finely ground gunpowder used to ignite the fire. "It's almost time. Let's go outside the city wall. Iron axe should be ready." About 2 miles west of the city wall, between the concealing forest and the impassable mountain range, was the test area he had drawn. Iron Axe and several other hunters had been waiting here for a long time. Except for Iron Axe, they were all locals, and they were also the best archers. Hearing that His Highness had a task for them, they could not wait to follow Iron Axe. By now, everyone knew that the new lord of Border Town would never be stingy with his hiring fees. Following Roland's orders, they erected long wooden poles and tied ropes around the perimeter, forming a perimeter of nearly half a kilometer. Night patrols were arranged near the city walls to prevent anyone from approaching by accident. Roland walked around the perimeter to check the perimeter and nodded. "Have you brought the prey?" "Your Highness, they're all here." Iron Axe came forward dragging a cage. Carter noticed that there were several pheasants and rabbits inside. "Very good. Put them 5, 10, 15, 30 steps away from the center. Tie one to each stake." Carter secretly shook his head and stepped forward to suggest, "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid that the animals you chose will not be able to test the effects. They are very timid and will scatter in all directions at the slightest sound. Even if you can scare them, you might not be able to scare away the demonic beasts." "Scared away demonic beasts?" Roland was slightly startled, but then he responded, "I don't intend to scare them away, even though the sound of this thing's explosion is really amazing." He walked to the center of the circle with the chief knight, put down the gunpowder bag, and used a dagger to make a small cut, letting some of the gunpowder leak out. Then he took out a leather bag filled with gunpowder and sprinkled it from the cut, while moving backward. Today was a windless day, which was very suitable for this primitive method of detonation. After retreating nearly 100 meters, Roland put away the leather bag. "All right, let's ignite it here." He repeatedly estimated the distance, and after confirming that it was correct, he said to Carter, "Go and call all the hunters." At this moment, Roland was also a little excited. He had already done a small flashover test before, so he was not worried about the test results. What he cared about was that this would be a great moment. From today on, firearms would officially appear on the stage, and he would be written as a milestone in history as a leader. After everyone gathered, Roland ignited the gunpowder. Carter was lying on the ground, looking at the quickly disappearing sparks. His heart was quite disapproving. At such a long distance, and without putting it in a bronze barrel, it was still a question whether the sound of the snow powder explosion could reach here. But His Royal Highness actually asked everyone to lie on the ground. But since Prince Roland took the lead, he could not say anything more. The winter ground was very cold. Even through the chain armor, he could feel the chill spreading. Carter moved his body, ready to turn his chest sideways, when suddenly a loud noise sounded. Because the distance was too close, the explosion and the shock wave arrived almost at the same time. He felt his ears buzzing, and the world suddenly became quiet. The tremor of the earth was fleeting. He looked up and saw a black cloud slowly rising, and then gravel and mud fell like rain. The impact on Roland was much smaller than that of the chief knight. Even when setting off firecrackers, he would cover his ears, but after igniting the gunpowder, he immediately prepared to protect himself. The point of the explosion was not like in the movies, where a huge fireball would appear. The fire flashed, and a large amount of mud was lifted up by the air wave, rushing about 10 meters into the air. When the dust settled, the only thing Roland felt was, the sound was much louder than firecrackers. As for Iron Axe and the other hunters, they were already dumbstruck with fear. Among them, only Iron Axe knew that this trip was to test a new weapon, but he did not expect that the sound of the weapon would be so amazing. Perhaps only the thunder of God's wrath could compare with it. Roland stood up and led everyone back to the point of the explosion. There was a half-meter deep pit on the ground, and the rabbit closest to the center of the explosion had already disappeared, leaving only a short piece of wood on the ground. He checked the other animals one by one. The pheasants placed 10 and 15 steps away were lying on the ground motionless, obviously dead. Although there were no obvious wounds, Roland knew that they had died from the shock wave of the explosion. The only survivor was the gray rabbit 30 steps, about 15 meters away. Its thin ear wall was oozing with blood, and when it saw someone approaching it, it no longer struggled, as if the loud noise had taken away its soul. Carter swallowed his saliva, and the buzzing in his ears gradually returned to normal. At this time, he understood what His Royal Highness meant when he said that he did not intend to scare them away. Is this really an improvement of snow powder? With this result, I'm afraid that the alchemists are far superior to the astrologers. Iron Axe looked at Roland with a completely different expression. Your Royal Highness, if the militia could have such a weapon, Border Town would no longer have to fear the threat of demonic beasts. I don't know if it can be mass-produced. Roland spread his hands. Probably not. When the months of the demons come, I estimate that we can only make 20 or 30 of them. The main key was saltpeter. In this era, the method of producing saltpeter was still very primitive. They collected the precipitated potassium nitrate crystals by pouring a mixture of lime into the feces and urine of humans and animals. In addition to the alchemy workshop and the upper-class nobles, there were almost no other uses. Therefore, there were not many such refineries, and if they were all used to make explosives, they would soon be exhausted. Chapter 35. Nightingale walked in the fog. From here, the world was only black and white. The lines that originally constituted things were no longer clear, and the boundaries between straight lines, broken lines, and curved lines became blurred, like a child's scribble. This was a very difficult feeling to describe, and it took Nightingale a long time to familiarize herself with how to distinguish the boundaries. As long as she used it properly, she could not be bound by ordinary things and freely walk through the fog. The seemingly connected walls. As long as she slightly changed the angle, she could see an entrance that absolutely did not exist in the real world. In the fog, up and down, front and back were no longer fixed concepts. They would change and even overlap. For example, what she was doing now, she entered the castle under the watchful eyes of the guards, followed the unpredictable lines, step by step, through the ceiling, and arrived at Anna's room. For her, this was a completely free world. Only in the fog, Nightingale could really relax, although it was quiet and lonely, but she liked this feeling of not being threatened. Most of the time, it was black and white, but she could occasionally see other colors. For example, Anna in front of her. Witches and ordinary people were different, they were aggregates of magic. Nightingale could see the flow and disappearance of this power. It was also the only color in the fog. She had never seen such a full and strong color like Anna. A green luster surged from her body. The center was almost incandescent, making people almost unable to look directly at it. This made Nightingale very confused. Generally speaking, the color of magic and ability were very similar. When she was in the Witch Cooperation Association, she had seen many witches with the ability to manipulate fire. Most of them were orange or dark red, like a group of jumping fireballs. No matter the size or brightness, they could not be compared with Anna. If this point was difficult to understand, then the other point was incredible. Such a huge amount of magic gathered in her body. How could she still be alive? In the entire Witch Cooperation Association, Nightingale could not find a person with such magic, even an adult, which would pale in comparison. If he waited until Anna came of age, no, she wouldn't have the chance. Nightingale sighed. The stronger the magic, the stronger the backlash. She didn't even dare to imagine what kind of terrible torture Anna would have to face when the demonic bite came. The excruciating pain of being torn apart from the inside would not cause one to lose consciousness. Until the moment one gave up resisting and accepted death, one would have to endure the pain repeatedly, without interruption. She walked out of the fog, and temporarily put away her gloomy thoughts. She cheered herself up and said, "Good morning, Anna." Anna was already used to his uninvited and sudden behavior. She nodded and did not answer. Instead, she continued to practice controlling the flames. Nightingale rubbed her nose and sat down beside the girl's bed. She had seen this kind of practice many times. In the beginning, Anna would accidentally set her clothes on fire. In the shed in the backyard, there was a bucket full of clothes for her to change into. Later, she was able to skillfully make the flames dance on her fingertips. Even Roland no longer urged her to practice. The shed in the garden was torn down and turned into a place to enjoy afternoon tea and bask in the sun. Even so, Anna still followed the prince's previous instructions and practiced for 1 to 2 hours every day. In her own room. "I brought fish cakes, do you want to eat?" Nightingale took out a cloth bag from her bosom and handed it to Anna. Anna sniffed and nodded. "Go wash your hands," Nightingale said with a smile. Fortunately, she didn't hate her. She just wasn't good at talking. Speaking of which, she obviously cared about Nana very much, but she also didn't talk much. In fact, except in front of Roland, she rarely spoke. In contrast, Roland talked too much. He always had an endless list of reasons. Even when eating, he had many rules and regulations. For example, he had to wash his hands before eating, not to eat too fast, not to pick up food that had fallen on the ground, and so on. He could give a long speech about each of them. At first, she was extremely impatient. But he was the master of this place, the fourth prince of Grey Castle. Since he lived and ate his food, she reluctantly listened to him. Now she was slowly getting used to these rules. She didn't know why, but when she fought with Anna, Nana, Roland, Carter and the others to wash their hands, she inexplicably felt a trace of fun. Anna put her hands into the bucket filled with well water and rubbed them, then lit a fire to dry them. She took a fish cake and returned to the table, nibbling on it. "You really don't want to go back with me?" Nightingale tried to find something to talk about. "There are many sisters there, they will take good care of you. Here, you can only move around within the boundaries of the castle. Don't you feel bored? Although there aren't many resources in the impassable mountain range, everyone is a family, gathered together for the same purpose. Your power is so strong they will welcome you. This winter, I'm afraid you won't be able to survive." At the end of her words, Nightingale's voice became lower. Perhaps it was too late. She thought, even if she returned to the camp, with her current huge magic, it would be almost impossible to survive until adulthood. The only thing she could do was to watch her die. "Before joining the Witch Cooperation Association, where did you live?" Nightingale was startled. She rarely asked her questions. I used to live in a big city in the east, not far from King's City. Did you have a good time? Happy? No, it was simply a period of time that she didn't want to recall. Living under someone else's roof, being despised and ridiculed. When they found out that she had become a witch, they looked after her like a cat or a dog, chained her neck, and forced her to do things for them. Nightingale shook her head and softly asked, "Why do you ask this?" "I used to live in the old district." Anna briefly recounted her experience. "My father sold me to the church for 25 golden dragon. It was His Highness who took me out of the cage. Here I am very happy. But you can't leave this castle, except for Roland Wimbledon. Everyone else still hates witches. I don't care, moreover. He said that he would change all this, didn't he? That's very difficult. As long as the church doesn't fall, witches will always be evil." Anna didn't refute. The silence was somewhat long enough that Nightingale thought she would never speak again. She suddenly asked, "Are you happy in the Witch Cooperation Association or here?" What are you talking about?" Nightingale was caught off guard. Of course it's the Witch Cooperation Association." To tell the truth, she wasn't interested in finding the Holy Mountain. But there were friends there that she couldn't give up. Was it Border Town? If she hadn't heard that there were witches in danger, she wouldn't have come here. The answer should be very obvious. But why didn't I say it at the first time? This time Anna showed a smile. Nightingale rarely saw her smile. Her eyes were like a lake reflecting the morning sun. It made people feel inexplicably at ease, even if they weren't in the fog. "I heard from Roland that you were looking for the Holy Mountain in the northern mountains. If the Holy Mountain means stability and a home, I think I have found it." This was her Holy Mountain, Nightingale realized. Although she didn't have much life left, her soul would reach the other side earlier than most witches. At this time, outside the door came the sound of rushing footsteps. Nightingale listened carefully. It sounded like Nana's footsteps. The door was pushed open, and Nana Pine rushed in. Chapter 36. Roland was dragged out of bed by Nightingale. When he learned that Nana Pine's father had come to find him, he was surprised at first, but soon realized that this was a rare opportunity. If he wanted the little girl to stay and help fight against the months of demons, he had to find a reason to let the Pine family stay in Border Town for the winter. Originally, this was a very tricky matter. The fourth prince's reputation among the nobles had fallen to the bottom. Coupled with the tension between them and Longsong's stronghold, it was obviously impossible for these nobles to stay in Border Town. From the beginning, Roland had never considered cooperating with the nobles. They may be good at fighting for power, but they were not suitable to fight side by side. He quickly put on his clothes, simply washed his face, and rinsed his mouth, and then went to the living room. Pine, who had been brought here by the guards for a long time, was already angry. When he saw the prince, he immediately stood up and asked, "Your Highness, where is my daughter?" This was the first time that Roland had seen Nana's father. He was not tall, but he had a rough beard on his face, and he was wearing a cotton-padded jacket with big pockets and tight leather pants, which made him look more like a hunter than a noble. "She's fine, Mr. Pine. Why did your guards let her in directly but stopped me outside?" Mr. Pine interrupted in a loud voice. "I need an explanation, Your Highness. Please bring my daughter out to see me." What kind of rhythm is this? Roland was stunned. He imagined that the other side would know that his daughter had unfortunately fallen into a witch, and would either beg him to hide the news, or simply let him solve this problem. But he really did not expect that Pine would be so aggressive, completely disregarding the aristocratic etiquette. As for why the guards let Nana in, it was entirely because of Roland's instructions. She came to play with Anna every 2 or 3 days, so the guards were already familiar with her. After thinking for a moment, Roland called a maid and asked her to bring Nana over. No matter how rude the other side was, he was still Nana's father, so he had to first let the two of them meet and then talk. If he showed the slightest intention to give the little girl to the church or abandon her, then it wouldn't be too late to take measures. Nana came out with Anna. The moment he saw his daughter, the impatience in Pine's eyes immediately disappeared. He opened his hands and shouted to Nana, Come to Daddy. But the little girl just hid behind Anna, showing half of her head. Will you sell me to the church? Cough. What are you talking about, silly child? The church doesn't accept idiots like you. Come home with me. This reaction made Roland somewhat puzzled. According to Nightingale, when Nana was using her magic, her father saw her, and she panicked and fled to the castle to find Anna. Her father chased her all the way here with a murderous look, but now it seemed that when Sir Pine looked at his daughter, there was only concern and love in his eyes. It was completely unlike the hatred that ordinary people had for witches. Did he make a mistake? Roland hesitated for a moment, then decided to open up about the matter. Mr. Pine, your daughter is a witch. I think you already know. What are you talking about, Your Highness? I don't understand. Sir Pine stamped his feet and stepped forward to grab Nana's hand, but Anna blocked his way. Father, I have become a witch. I'm sorry, Nana whispered. Sir Pine finally became anxious. Don't talk nonsense. What witch? It was Carr who taught you. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have let you go to the academy. The church's words are all bullshit. Hearing this, Roland suddenly understood something. Probably the reason why the other side tried to cover up for Nana was because they had misunderstood him. That's why he was so anxious before seeing his daughter. Anna, Roland winked at the witch. The latter nodded, and while trying to pull Nana away, she stretched out her right hand. Flames spewed out from her palm and passed over his head. Sir Pine's eyes widened, and he took a few steps back in panic. Nana also panicked and held onto Anna's arm. Sister Anna, don't. Your Highness, this is. As you can see, she is also a witch, just like your daughter, Roland said, spreading out his hands. The reason why Nana can freely enter and leave the castle isn't as you think. Now can we have a good talk? Sir Pine seemed to have woken up from a dream. Twice. Your Highness, I. Sit down first. Roland pointed to the table. Have a cup of tea first. Sure enough, Roland sighed in his heart. My reputation is so bad that I can't even let a child go. The other side's rude behavior at the beginning made Roland completely understand. A father who was concerned about his daughter, seeing his daughter run into the Lord's castle, while the guards at the gate acted as if it was nothing out of the ordinary. What did it mean? If the person involved was himself, I'm afraid that he would tear down the castle with his bare hands. As for the later denial that his daughter was a witch, his intention was even more obvious. Sir Pine was worried that the prince would use the Nana has fallen and needs to be purified excuse to threaten him, while he himself didn't care whether his baby daughter was a witch or not. Sir Pine hesitated for a long time, but finally sat down, picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp, then wiped his mouth, looking a little embarrassed. I'm sorry I was rude. May I ask, when did you know that my daughter had become a witch? Before the winter. The first to discover her awakening was not me, but her teacher Carr Van Bate. Because Anna and I are friends, he entrusted Nana to me, hoping that I can give her protection, Roland explained in detail. And during this month and a half, whenever she had free time, she would come to the castle to practice her ability. By the way, your daughter's ability is to heal. Is that so? Sir Pine scratched his head. I was wondering how the cat could suddenly run and jump. The cat. Ahem, in fact, it's nothing. When I came home, I saw the child sitting at the door holding a cat that had been hit by a carriage. I was going to scare her from behind, but I didn't expect that when she saw me, she would run away. The cat was the same. It was obviously hit with a broken leg. He looked at Nana and Anna. Are you friends? Anna hadn't said anything yet, but Nana had already nodded her head quickly. Sir Pine's expression softened a bit. Seeing this, Roland asked, You don't seem to think that witches are evil people who have been tempted by the devil. Of course my daughter is not evil, he said categorically. No matter what she has become, there is no doubt about it. He was simply a completely different person from Anna's father. Roland couldn't help but sigh. Now he understood why Nana was always carefree and always had a smile on her face. For a child, such a family was like a warm cradle. I don't think so, Mr. Pine, the prince said bluntly. Your daughter's ability is of great significance to the wounded. I hope that she can stay in Border Town and help me fight against the months of the demons. Sir Pine hesitated. Your Highness, please forgive me for refusing. When the months of the demons come, it will become very dangerous here. I can't leave her in Border Town. Chapter 37. Danger is relative, Mr. Pine. And danger also means opportunity. Prince Roland read the relevant information collected by his assistant minister. I heard that you inherited your father's title? He was a knight, and later, because of his meritorious service in battle, he was awarded the title of Baron and a fief. Exactly, Pine said, nodding. That battle was a battle of honor for the innocent, and it was also during the months of the demons. A small number of demonic beasts accidentally crossed the defensive line of Longsong's stronghold, through the Redwater River, and entered the hinterland of the Western Territory. At that time, your father was patrolling the area, and when he encountered the remaining demonic beasts, he did not choose to avoid them like most people, and instead informed the reinforcements to encircle them, because behind him was an undefended town, although that town had nothing to do with him, Roland said, while paying attention to Pine's expression. You should know better than me what happened next. Your father gathered the town's militia, and with his own attendants, he fought against the demonic beasts and won. Yes, he said with a somewhat excited tone, obviously full of yearning for this family history. One of them was a huge monster, like a deer and a cow, or perhaps it was a mixture of both. Its legs were thicker than my father's torso, and when it ran, the ground trembled. If it were me, I really wouldn't know how to defeat such a monster. But he did it. My father stood near a shallow ditch, luring the enraged beast to him. Taking advantage of the moment when it accelerated, he lay down in the shallow ditch, propped up his broadsword, and placed the hilt on a stone at the bottom of the ditch. That seemingly invincible fool directly hit the tip of the sword, and its whole belly was cut open, and its intestines and black blood flowed out, almost drowning my father. My family's fireplace still has a trophy from that battle, a huge demonic beast horn. Roland took a sip of tea and said slowly, it was an admirable battle. He followed the knight's beliefs, compassion, and heroism. Later, Joey Cole, who was still an Earl of Longsong's stronghold at that time, was promoted to a duke by my father, Wimbledon III, 25 years ago. He also served as the protector of the southern border, and had jurisdiction over the entire southern border. Unfortunately, after the backer became independent, Old Payne, who stayed east of the stronghold, became a thorn in the side of the Duke of the Stronghold. Your Highness, you know very well, Sir Pine somewhat helplessly sighed. The Duke of Stronghold and Sir Joey have always been at odds with each other. Joey Cole is also not an earl under the Duke of Stronghold. His bloodline can be traced back to a branch of the royal family. Whether it is family or bloodline, he is not inferior to Sir Ryan. This is politics, Roland thought to himself. Wimbledon III's game of checks and balances. In order to understand this complicated relationship, he called the assistant minister to explain it to him for a whole day. The enfeoffment and jurisdiction between the nobles was extremely chaotic. In theory, the higher nobles had the right to issue orders to the lower nobles, but in practice it was much more complicated. Joey Cole and the Duke of Ryan were examples. As an earl directly enfeoffed by the king, although his territory was in the western border, his prestige and influence were no less than that of the Duke of Ryan. When Joey became the Duke of the southern border, naturally there would be new spies arranged to enter his territory. This was the usual method of the Grey Castle royal family, to maintain stability and power. So when you inherited this territory, trade and agricultural production are declining day by day. The family business is also declining day by day, Roland slowly said. Now, there is a new opportunity in front of you. A new opportunity? Presumably you have heard of the famine 2 years ago. The stronghold withheld the next month's food on the grounds of insufficient ore. And this year, we are facing the same dilemma. The unexpected collapse of the North Slope mine has left the people of Border Town with no way out. We must block the demonic beasts behind the newly built walls. This battle may not be smooth sailing, but as I said before, danger also means opportunity. Pine already understood the prince's meaning. He frowned and didn't immediately answer. Speaking of which, you don't look like a normal noble, Roland smiled. No one would go out dressed like this, and your hands are full of calluses. Mr. Pine, you haven't let go of your father's inheritance, have you? As a knight, you are good at fighting skills. Of course he hasn't let go, Roland thought. Otherwise he wouldn't be running around in the concealing forest all day long. According to the information provided by Barov, during his days in Border Town, he spent at least 3 days a week in the concealing forest. Moreover, every time he went there he was fully equipped, because he couldn't afford to keep a servant, so he directly hired hunters from the town to help him. Some people love to fight, and Sir Pine was obviously such a person. If you are willing to stay in Border Town, I can give you an opportunity to regain your father's glory, like him, relying on his sword and courage to grasp the glory. If you have an outstanding achievement, I will give you a piece of land in the east of Border Town, a land suitable for the status of a viscount. Although this kind of situation was rare, the promise was effective. As an adult prince, legally he could confer the title of viscount, baron, and knight, but he rarely rewarded other people's subordinates. First, it was unbecoming of a noble, and second, in case the other side refused, it would be more embarrassing. But Roland didn't care about his demeanor, he only wanted Nana, the mobile medical station. As for refusing, he wasn't too worried. After Joey became the guardian of the southern border, he didn't take his father with him, which proved that the former had already given up on the Pine family. Pine finally relaxed. Then, Your Highness, can I send Nana back to Longsong's stronghold? No one has ever resisted the demonic beasts here. In case of failure, I don't want my daughter to be buried here. I told you from the beginning, Mr. Pine, the danger is relative. Have you ever thought about it? In case Nana is found to be a witch in Longsong's stronghold, what will happen? That place is not like Border Town. The church has been rooted in the city for a long time. Their believers and eyes are everywhere. Once exposed, even I can't save her. Roland paused for a moment, then added, Border Town will not fall. When the months of the demons come, I will fight side by side with the people on the wall. Our opponents are just a group of mutated beasts, not invulnerable demons. Your father defeated them in an open field, and we have an impassable wall to protect us. If there is an accident, I will let Nana leave first, he paused, and Anna, I will leave a boat at the dock, I promise, they will be safe and sound. In that case, I believe in you, Your Highness. Pine Pain stood up, knelt on one knee, and gave the prince a standard knight's salute. I am willing to fight for you. When Pine and Nana left, Anna gave Roland a supercilious look. Chapter 38. Ironaxe knew that he was being supervised. The hunters who had participated in the test explosion that day were gathered together and moved into a 2-story building near the castle. Looking out of the window, he could see a stone wall with guards guarding the entrance and exit. He didn't care about this at all, and even felt that His Highness had only sent 2 guards to guard the place, which was very imprudent. Until now, Ironaxe still remembered the roar of the test explosion that day. No weapon had ever brought him such a strong shock. In the extreme south, he had seen the orange fire erupting from the ground, which could last for decades. He had also seen the wind and huge waves covering the sky at the endless cape. However, the power of heaven was unpredictable. It was the will of Mother Earth, or the sea god, and the iron whip used by the gods to punish all living things. But His Royal Highness had stolen the authority of the 3 gods with his own strength, and obtained the power of heaven's punishment. Although he was still far from the real Father's thunder, it was not a realm that a human could achieve. In Iron Sand City, if the participants were still useful, they would usually have their tongues cut off. Of course, this was not the safest way. Only the dead would keep secrets forever. As for the foreigners, it would be blasphemy if they looked at it, and it would never be possible for foreigners to join the core class of the Majin clan. The prince knew that he was half an alien, but he still allowed him to witness the fire of heaven's punishment, and planned to let him be responsible for the formation of the hunter team. This trust made Ironaxe's blood boil. In Iron Sand City, he had experienced countless betrayals and frame-ups, and fled to the southern border of Grey Castle. He was discriminated against because he was half Sand Nation, and half mainland nation. Finally, he came to border town disheartened, intending to rely on hunting for the rest of his life. He did not expect that he would be favored by His Highness here. He had no doubt that with this new weapon, the one to win the battle for the throne would be His Highness Roland Wimbledon. Thinking of the opportunity to serve the future king, Iron Axe was very excited. Everyone gathered downstairs. Hearing the voice, Iron Axe looked up and found that it was the chief knight of the fourth prince, Carter Lannis. He quickly tidied up his clothes, walked downstairs, and stood at attention in front of Carter. He had participated in the training of the militia and knew that His Highness liked disciplined and uniformed troops. The other hunters were much slower. The 6 of them spent about half an hour to line up. Same old place, come with me. Carter did not seem to mind. He led the group out of the door and went straight out of the city walls. It was still the location of the previous test explosion, but this time, there was no longer a warning line. Other than Roland, there were also 4 other knights. All of them were Carter's subordinates. Iron Axe noticed that the prince was fiddling with a strangely shaped metal stick while explaining something to the knight. Seeing Iron Axe and the others, Roland came up to them and said, "How is it? Are you used to living in the new place?" "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness." Everyone bowed and said that their new residence was very comfortable. In fact, the new house was much better than the old one, Iron Axe thought. At least it wouldn't leak. And the roof wasn't made of transparent straw but tidy tiles. "That's good," Roland nodded. "The current arrangement is for safety reasons. After the end of the months of the demons, you can move back. In addition, I have already sent your first month's salary to your families, and you can also meet them every weekend. Of course, you will be accompanied by guards." "Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness," the hunter said cheerfully. This really surprised Iron Axe. Not to mention the iron law of the Sand Nation. Even the management of the Grey Castle army shouldn't be so lax. Is it because of His Highness's personal tolerance? Iron Axe faintly worried that if he wanted to fight for the throne, he had to be ruthless. He had seen this too often in Iron Sand City. But when Prince Roland said that he would test a new weapon based on gunpowder, Iron Axe immediately put these worries to the back of his mind. He stared at the prince without blinking as he took the 2 odd-shaped iron sticks in front of the crowd. "This thing is called a flintlock," Roland said. "Next, I'll tell you how to use it." It only took Iron Axe half an hour to completely familiarize himself with the use of the new weapon. He poured the black powder, which could attract the fire of heaven's punishment, into the barrel, stuffed a lead ball into it, and stabbed it to the end with a straight bar. Then he poured the gunpowder into the medicine pool at the back, aimed at the target, and pulled the trigger. Although he had always thought that he had a talent for killing, whether it was a sword, knife, hammer, axe, or spear, he had mastered these skills after years of training and actual combat. To master a weapon in half an hour, this speed was probably only comparable to a crossbow. The other flintlock was handed to Carter. The chief knight was also full of interest in this novel weapon, so he picked it up and didn't want to put it down. After a few rounds of simulation, Roland let the 2 of them test the effect with live ammunition. The target had already been prepared. A half-body plate supported by a wooden stick was set up by the other 2 knights at a distance of about 30 feet, about 10 meters. Iron Axe and Carter followed the prince's instructions, raised the gun, aimed and pulled the trigger. The loud sound of the first shot startled everyone present, including Iron Axe, but soon there was only surprise left on everyone's face. A small hole appeared on the half-body plate armor that served as the target. The lead ball neatly penetrated the thickest part of the chest of the plate. Before shooting, Iron Axe had carefully observed the armor. It was obviously not a low-quality product made by a manual workshop. The hammer and anvil marks on the collar proved that this was a standard armor from the Grey Castle Blacksmith Guild. The thickest part of the front edge was about half a finger, enough to resist a crossbow at close range. To deal with this iron can a heavy crossbow, a warhammer, or a halberd was the wisest choice. In comparison, the gun, which was also easy to operate, was at least far more powerful than the crossbow, and its loading speed was comparable to the crossbow, and its accuracy. A 30-foot target was not a problem. Your Highness, the production of this thing? Carter asked. At present there are only these two. When the months of the demons come, we can produce at most 2 more. Seeing Carter, Iron Axe was obviously relieved. He could roughly guess what the other side was thinking. If this weapon was easy to make, it would only take a few days of simple training to train a large number of soldiers who could hold a gun and go into battle quickly. They were not limited by age, profession, or even gender. Even a weak woman could pose a great threat to the knight. Although it was not as shocking as the fire of heaven's punishment, it was still a good weapon. Iron Axe thought that the great power made it easy for him to kill some large demonic beasts with thick skin and flesh on the city wall. If he had a gun when he faced the hybrids, he might not have been so embarrassed. Roland was the only one who knew the true significance of this weapon. Chapter 39. Roland stood on top of the city wall, looking to the north. Over the past month, he had repeated the cycle of the castle, the mining area, and the city wall, checking every detail that might have been forgotten. The malicious stabbing movements were getting more and more skillful. Under Carter's repeated drills, they were able to stabilize the spear shaft, and only when the hunter in charge of observing shouted the attack did they send out their spears. Standing behind them was the hunter team. All the hunters who stayed in Border Town and were good at using bows and crossbows were included in this team. These experienced hunters were the main force in killing the demonic beasts. Shooting at the corner of the 12-foot-high city wall, there was almost no possibility of missing. The last team was composed of Iron Axe, Carter, and 2 other elite hunters. The 4 flintlock guns made by the blacksmith shop and assembled by Anna had already been put into use. Only when they encountered a difficult monster or hybrid demonic beast that couldn't be penetrated by the crossbow would they be killed by the team. Their position was very free. They could wander around this 200-meter distance and appear wherever they were needed. As for the explosives, they were stored in a tightly guarded warehouse under the city wall. When needed, they would be transported to the city wall alone. After all, if something went wrong with this thing, it could cause more damage than the demonic beasts. The teeth of the demonic beasts couldn't bite through cement, but the explosives could send the entire city wall to the sky. So far, Roland had organized 2 actual combat exercises, including the use of explosives. Thanks to these 2 exercises, the militia was able to avoid the embarrassment of being frightened by the explosion during the official defense. Another advantage was that, when everyone found that the prince still had such a powerful weapon in his hands, the morale of the team suddenly rose. Your Highness, Bearov tightened his collar. The income from your trade has been spent. If the months of the demons is really as long as the astrologer said, I don't think we can last until the end of the winter. Then fill up my vault, Roland said without hesitation. In addition, don't stop trading with Willowtown. The first steam engine has been transported to the mine, and the rubble from the collapse has been cleaned up. We can still get a little output for the whole winter. Especially the gemstones. There is no need to emphasize the price. Sell them as soon as possible. It's always good to store more food and dried meat. Bearov nodded. I will do it, Your Highness. But, seeing that the assistant minister was hesitant to speak, Roland, of course, knew what he wanted to say. Don't worry, I have arranged a boat. If the situation really collapses, I will leave the town. That's a relief, Bearov said with relief. Roland smiled at him. Go do your work. I'll take a look by myself. After Bearov left, the prince slowly climbed the watchtower. This was the highest point in the middle of the city wall. From here, one could overlook the vast jungle and rolling mountains in front of them. The cold wind blew against his face, but he didn't care. Only on this spacious high platform could he calm down from the anxiety he felt when facing the great battle. You're lying to him, someone said. You never intended to leave. Life is already so difficult. Some things are better left unsaid. I don't understand what you're talking about. If being a prince is considered difficult, then what are we? Nightingale appeared. Even if you can't be a king, as long as you live through the 5 years of the fight for the throne, you will still be a lord. Compared to worrying about this, it's better for you to accompany Anna. I'm afraid she doesn't have much time left. Roland was silent for a moment. I don't think she won't live through the months of the demons. Why? She said she won't lose to the demons, he paused. I believe her. You actually believe a witch? Nightingale shook her head. We are cursed by the devil. Is that so? I believe you too. Brian, dressed in civilian clothes, stood in front of Greyhound's tombstone. He gently stroked the new stone. The pure white surface of the stone was engraved with a line of words. Nameless, but forever remembered. The hero who sacrificed himself for Border Town. Greyhound. I realized my dream. When the months of the demons is over, His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince will hold a ceremony for me. But I don't want to sit in the hospital bed and wait. My wounds have healed, and the city wall is where I should be. The months of the demons is coming. The demonic beasts may be terrible, but they will hit the defensive line that everyone worked together to establish, and will not be able to take a step forward. I will defend this town together with you. I will wield my sword. But it's not over. The person who framed you is still alive, but he won't live forever. This is His Royal Highness's promise to me. The next time we meet, I will bring good news. Brian bent down and placed a bouquet of flowers in front of the tombstone. Then goodbye, my friend. Sister Anna, aren't you afraid? Nana asked, lying on the bed with her legs crossed. Afraid of what? The demons will devour me. Nightingale said it was winter, but I became a witch in the autumn. This is the first time. The first time, Anna thought. It will be very painful. Sometimes you will even want to die immediately. Ah, Nana exclaimed, and immediately covered her mouth. But you will survive just like me. I don't know, Nana whispered. I'm not as strong as you. I'm not that strong. Anna closed her eyes, and the scene of her first meeting with Roland appeared in her mind. In that dark and cold dungeon, he put his clothes on her and whispered that he wanted to hire her. Until now, she still felt that it was incredible. You will also encounter things that make you want to live, even if you have to struggle to live. For example, meat covered with sauce, she sighed. How do I know what you want, huh? Looking at Nana, who was staring at her, Anna wiped her face with her hands. Is there anything dirty on my face? No. Nana shook her head. I'm just a little surprised. You never talked so much to me before. Sister Anna, when you closed your eyes to think, you look so beautiful. Anna rolled her eyes, jumped out of bed, and walked to the window. Nana followed. What are you looking at? The concealing forest. The forest is in the west, Anna snapped. You can only see the Redwater River from here. Sister Anna, look. The girl pointed to the sky. Anna was startled, then opened the window, and a cold wind mixed with snowflakes poured into the room. She reached out her hand, pinched the crystal-clear snowflake, and a burst of coolness came from between her fingers. It's snowing. After a long silence, Nightingale said, You didn't lie. Of course, Roland said with a smile. I rarely lie. Nightingale didn't speak again. She turned her head, and her eyes had an unclear look. Suddenly, she felt a chill on her neck, and couldn't help but shrink her neck. Looking up, she found that, at some point, snowflakes were floating above the city wall. In the gray sky, there seemed to be countless white elves. They were dancing in the north wind, accompanied by the militia training slogan, flying everywhere. Even if the demonic beasts are huge, they are nothing more than the minions of the devils of hell. In front of the God's stone of retaliation, no evil could escape the punishment of God. Whether it was demonic beasts, witches, or devils themselves, they would all be turned into ashes. At this point, Gerald Wimbledon put down his pen and shook his numb hands. It was strange that he could hold a 15-pound two-handed sword for a whole day, but he felt tired after writing so few words. He laughed at himself. I'm really suitable for rough work. Speaking of demonic beasts, I suddenly remembered that my fourth brother was sent to a poor place like Border Town. I'm afraid that he has already fled to Longsong's stronghold with his tail between his legs. Although the demonic beasts there can't be compared to the ones in Hermes. I can't blame him. Even if I went to that place, I could only take refuge there. From this, I can see how unfair my father is. Just because my second brother was exceptionally smart from an early age, he decided to let him inherit the throne? My father forgot that he didn't win the throne of Grey Castle by relying on his intelligence. Since my mother's death, it has become more and more difficult for me to understand his thoughts. The following content made Gerald hesitate. He didn't know whether he should tell Olivia his real plan. After a pause, he decided to continue writing. If the plan went well, he should have arrived at the palace of Grey Castle by the time this letter was delivered. My dear Scholarong is right. If I don't do anything, the throne will not belong to me in the end. He has already observed this from the stars. The apocalypse star is moving away from the blazing sun. In 4 months, it will completely leave the orbit of the blazing sun. The scholar told me so. Obviously, there is not much time left. I can't wait like this any longer. After today's war, I will quietly return to King's City with my loyal warriors. Coldwind Ridge is far less fertile than Valencia, but there is no shortage of brave warriors here. As long as I throw some money and promises, they will pounce on my target like hungry wolves. Of course, I don't want to do that. I just want to personally ask my father why he would issue such a childish decree, like the decree to fight for the throne. What made him forget that I was the one with the first right to inherit the throne? Scholar Ong has arranged everything for me. Olivia, my love, just wait a little longer. The day I become the king will be the day I take you as my queen. If I fail, don't come back to King's City. Live a good life in Coldwind Ridge. I love you, Gerald. He carefully folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and sealed it with wax. After checking it several times, he knocked on the table, and soon a guard came in. Send this letter to the Rose of Coldwind Ridge. You don't have to travel day and night, and you don't have to ride a horse. Dress up as an ordinary traveler, and take the trade caravan between the two places. There is only one thing you have to remember. This letter must be delivered in person. Yes, Your Royal Highness. Very well, you can go. After Gerald waved the guard away, he simply sat on the table with his feet hanging over the fire pit. In this way, he had no way out. He closed his eyes and recalled the scene of his childhood. At that time, he took his second brother and third sister to play hide and seek in the garden of King's City. Third sister fell down, and the two of them insisted on falling down with her. Since when did the three of them become so unfamiliar with each other? Gerald shook his head and put aside his complicated thoughts. He was not suitable to be sentimental. He thought that these puzzles would eventually have an answer after he sat on the throne. Just then, there was a dull sound of a horn outside the tent. Woo 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 woo. It's coming. He jumped down from the table and put on his shoes. When he walked out of the tent, the whole camp was already moving. The running soldiers and flags converged into a torrent, converging on the predetermined battlefield. Muddy echoes could be heard from the distant mountains, and the echoes were endless. The horn sounded, indicating the demonic beasts were coming. Follow me. He rode on the horse brought by the guard, and trotted to the top of the city wall. Only by standing on the wall of the holy city could one feel its grandeur. It was like an insurmountable moat, standing at the edge of the impassable mountain range. The top was flat and wide enough for dozens of people to pass side by side. In front of it was a cliff made of glaciers, and behind it was a flat plateau. This was the reason why the church desperately wanted to build the new holy city on the top of the mountain. Taking advantage of this terrain, they built an almost impenetrable line of defense. But Gerald Wimbledon was looking at the long term. To be able to transport so much stone and wood from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, and to build a city on Hermes in just 20 years, the strength shown by the church was already amazing. However, no matter how much he hated the church, Gerald had to admit that if they did not support them to defend Hermes, all the countries on the continent would face a catastrophe. This was also the basis for the signing of the Months of the Demons. When the Months of the Demons came, the 4 kingdoms bordering Hermes must send troops to support the church and fight together with the church's army of judges. The 4 flags at the top of the city wall stood in the wind. Dawn with a snake's body and a scepter, Wolfheart with a crossed sword and shield, Eternal Winter with an iceberg rose, and Grey Castle with a tower and spear. Looking at the black spots in the distant sky, Gerald Wimbledon clenched his sword. Chapter 41. As Brian had said, once it started snowing in Border Town, it wouldn't stop. In one night, the town had been wrapped in a layer of white gauze. In the early morning, the snow had weakened, and there were occasionally a few scattered snowflakes falling from the sky, but the sky was still gray. Thinking that they wouldn't see the sun for several months, Roland felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. This was simply illogical, he thought, although it was strange to look for common sense in a world where witches had magic. But how could the demonic beasts affect the weather? Unfortunately, he didn't have a weather satellite to tell him the specific distribution of the world's clouds. On the way to the Western Wall, Carter couldn't help but sigh. The town has become a lot more deserted. There are still a group of people who have followed the nobles to evacuate. That's good. At least they won't hold us back. Roland exhaled a breath of white air. I have already arranged for Barav to conduct a census this winter. What is that? It is to go door to door to do statistics. How many people are left? What are the names of each family? What are their occupations? And then record it, Roland explained. In this way, whether it is the deployment of human resources during the war, or the distribution of pensions after the war, it can be implemented quickly and effectively. Human resources? Carter blinked then smiled. Your Highness, you are really different from before. Oh, in the past, although you would say some things that I didn't understand, and do some inexplicable things, but after all, those things were not in line with your identity as a prince. But now, Carter paused for a moment, as if considering his words. Whether it is those strange training regulations you set, or the novel experimental products from the alchemy workshop, the results are surprisingly effective. Perhaps this is what my grandfather said. The reason why extraordinary people are extraordinary is that they can always see the things that ordinary people ignore. I have a feeling that maybe you can really become the next king. Really? Roland suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Was there anything more satisfying than being recognized after a struggle? For a moment, he felt that his hands and feet were full of strength, and the gray sky wasn't so annoying. Walking up the wall, he saw the militia clearing the snow on the aisle. When they saw the prince, they all bowed in salute. I should have taught them to salute, Roland thought. How was it last night? We haven't found any traces of demonic beasts, Ironax answered him. Your Highness, according to past experience, after the first snowfall, we still have a relatively stable period. During this period of time, there are not many demonic beasts, and most of the mutated ones are weak animals. Roland nodded. Then continue to be vigilant. The area behind the city wall had been transformed into a barracks. When the alarm was not sounded, most people would rest in the barracks to conserve their energy. The patrols were rotated. Considering the low temperature in winter, each team would only patrol for 4 hours before being replaced. These measures were all set by Roland one by one. He had asked Brian, and learned that Longsong Stronghold had no plan to resist the demonic beasts. The unluckiest recruits would be sent to monitor the movements of the demonic beasts, and would have to stay on the city wall for a whole day. Therefore, there were often cases of laziness and desertion. During the winter, because of dereliction of duty or violation of military orders, as many as 20 or 30 people would be hanged. As for the traces of demonic beasts, it was even more chaotic. There was no division of defense, nor was there a designated person responsible. Thinking of the level of war in this era, Roland also understood. It was an era of extreme emphasis on individual bravery, emphasizing honor and plunder. Even the knight would be hot-blooded and rush to the front, so it was better not to ask for too much. Patrolling along the wall, it seemed that everything was going well, but Roland found that he had overlooked a problem. That was the barricades. These barricades were still clearly leading the demonic beasts to the middle of the wall. But if Brian was right, 2 to 3 months of snow would eventually fill up all the barricades. At that time, any point of the 600-meter line of defense could become the route of the demonic beasts. His men simply had no time to take care of such a large area. It was also impossible to send people to clear the snow. A few agile demonic beasts were enough to make the team suffer heavy losses. Perhaps he still had to rely on the power of the witches. For example, he could let Nightingale sneak out of the town with Anna, ignite a fire to melt the snow, and then sneak back, just like how she had stolen Nana from the Pine family. At this moment, the observation post on the left side of the wall shouted, "Look in front." Roland and Carter looked in the direction he was pointing. A small shadow crawled out of the snow and slowly moved towards the wall. "Your Royal Highness, do you think we should?" The hunter in charge of the defense turned his head and asked. "According to the previous drill, you should decide whether to blow the horn or not," Roland said. "Moreover, you have more experience than me in this regard." He hesitated, but finally just pulled the string of the crossbow and continued to stand on the wall to observe. Roland nodded with satisfaction. For now, the order on the wall was still well maintained. But he didn't know if they could quickly organize the defense according to the drill steps, when a large number of demonic beasts attacked Border Town. The shadow gradually moved closer, and when it was about 50 meters away from the wall, Roland could clearly see the appearance of the demonic beasts. Was it probably a fox mutant? Its fur was grayish-black, its eyes were red, and it came to the wall while panting. "This guy seems to have been infected not long ago, so it's not a big threat," Iron Axe said as he aimed his bow. "You said that they were infected by the breath of hell, and were expelled to the west." "Not only to the west," Carter came over and said. "When the gates of hell opened in the barbarian land, any place that wasn't blocked by the impassable mountain range would be attacked by the demonic beasts, especially the big gap in the north. The impassable mountain range, which stretched for more than 10 miles, seemed to have been cut off, which was the main direction of the demonic beast's attack. This manic monster wandered for a moment under the wall, then raised its head, grinned at the people on the wall and growled. When it was about to jump, Iron Axe released the bowstring, and a sharp arrow accurately pierced its neck, firmly nailing it to the ground. Roland noticed that the blood coming out of the wound was black. Chapter 42. What will happen if you are bitten by a demonic beast? Roland asked. Will you become like them? I hope it won't be a different version of Resident Evil, he thought. With the current level of technology, there was no way to extract the virus antigen. Of course not, Iron Axe said with an expression of, how can you ask such a question? If you are bitten, you will only become a corpse. What about their meat? Can it be eaten? Carter exclaimed. Your Highness, how can this kind of evil thing be eaten? They are all contaminated by the breath of hell. Roland looked at Iron Axe. The latter nodded and said, Your knight is right. I have cut the meat of a demonic beast and fed it to the hounds. But the hounds soon died after eating the meat. Really? What a pity, Roland sighed. In this era the source of food was very scarce. If the demonic beasts could be eaten, winter would simply be the month of harvest. Think about it. All the animals in the forest would run crazily to Border Town, even saving hunting tools. After patrolling the city wall, he decided to visit Nana. Today, the closest noble house to the city wall had been requisitioned by Roland for use as a field hospital, of course. To the outside world it was called a medical hospital. Just in case, this was the most heavily guarded place in Border Town, besides the city wall. When the owner of the house returned to Longsong Stronghold, he took all the property he could take with him. Plus Border Town itself was a place that could be abandoned at any time. So although the house was large, there were no murals, carpets, porcelain, or any other decorations. If it wasn't clean, it would simply look like an ownerless house that had been vacant for a long time. Roland broke all the wooden partitions on the first floor, except for the corridor in the hall, so that all the other rooms were connected as a whole, and then placed 10 beds. A simple hospital was formed. There were no nurses, no doctors, and even the 10 beds were unlikely to be used. Nana's treatment didn't require her to stay in bed to recuperate. It would be effective immediately. During the day, she was on standby on the second floor of the hospital, and when Anna had nothing to do, she would come to accompany her. Serpine and Brian were responsible for guarding the first floor. There were also 2 guards outside the door. It could be said that nothing could go wrong. But what Roland did not expect was that the first casualty received by the field hospital was not from the militia defending the city wall, but from the workers of the North Slope mine. Nail felt that his hands were trembling, hearing Tai-Tu's miserable cries that had already become hoarse. He quickened his footsteps once more, even wishing that he could fly. All of this was because of his negligence, he thought. Damn it, how could he have forgotten Sir Knight's instructions? If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have accepted the job of controlling the big guy. Ever since the big black machine was installed at the entrance of the mine, the miners' work had become much easier. Originally, the most tiring task was to transport the excavated ore out of the mine. When the mining basket was filled with stones, it would require 3 to 4 people to drag it. Usually, 2 people would push from the back, and the rest would pull from the front. After many years of mining, the originally uneven ground of the tunnel had been ground flat by the mining basket, and the iron pad at the bottom of the mining basket also needed to be replaced frequently. A week ago, the chief knight commanded Tai-Tu and his men to transport a lot of strange metal parts up the mountain, and after a few days of tossing and turning, they assembled a furnace. Nail had never expected that this furnace could actually move by itself after the fire was ignited. Not only could it move, but it also had extraordinary strength. Sir Knight said that this was the invention of His Royal Highness, and it seemed to be called the steam engine. As long as the hemp rope was tied tightly to the mining basket, and the fire was ignited, this big guy would hum, turn the capstan, and quickly pull the mining basket out of the mine. It was simply incredible. After Sir Knight demonstrated it several times, he asked Tai-Tu to choose a person to be responsible for operating the steam engine. When Nail was chosen, he was very happy for a long time. Thinking about it, as long as he stayed in front of this machine, he would never have to go down to the mine to dig stones or push the basket. The collapse last time had given him quite a fright, so what Sir Knight told him, Nail firmly kept in mind. It was not difficult to say. When he needed the big guy to work, he just needed to lift the green lever and press the red lever. Sir Knight said that the green lever was connected to the inlet valve, and the red lever was connected to the exhaust valve, so that the steam would enter the cylinder through the pipeline. After the mining basket was pulled up, if he wanted to stop the machine, he had to do the opposite. He had to lift the red lever and press the green lever, so that the steam would be discharged from the pipe on the side of the boiler. After each cycle, he had to replenish the water in the furnace. Although he did not understand what the valve and the cylinder meant, Nail had to do it one by one. However, Sir Knight stressed that he had to pay attention to 2 things. First, the sequence could not be wrong. When it was started, the green must be followed by the red, and when it was shut down, the red must be followed by the green. If he made a mistake, it could lead to the destruction of the machine. Second, when it was vented, he had to first clear the surrounding miners, and he had to constantly remind them, until the red lever was completely lifted. Chapter 43. Where's Sister Anna? Nana heard the sound of footsteps coming from the stairs. She ran to the door and looked, but was disappointed to find that it was His Royal Highness. She's still working. She'll probably come back later. Work. Nana had recently heard this word from the prince's mouth. Do you mean burning the grey mud powder? For the time being, yes. Nana pouted and went back to the table. I also have a job, she thought. I have to stay here and treat those who were injured defending the town. What, Anna isn't here, so you're bored? Roland smiled, pulled out a chair and sat by the fireplace. Yes, Nana replied honestly, propping up her chin. It wasn't that she didn't want to treat those who were injured. It was just too terrible. She still remembered the first time she treated Brian. The man's whole body looked like it was soaked in blood. The reddish-brown blood clots solidified on his chest. His mouth was like a dehydrated fish, spitting out red and white blood foam. Then she fainted. It was really humiliating. Nana raised her head and secretly glanced at Roland. She found that he was leaning on the chair and snoring. It seems that the prince is also tired, she thought. building the walls, training the soldiers, and protecting the town from demonic beasts. These are all his jobs. When he asked her to come here, she hesitated for a long time, but in the end she didn't refuse. You will also encounter something that makes you want to live, even if it's a struggle to live. Nana didn't quite understand the meaning of this sentence, but when she closed her eyes, Anna's appearance appeared in her mind. That pair of blue eyes were like a lake, slowly surrounding her. This was also the reason why she promised Roland. She wanted to be as strong as Sister Anna. Suddenly she heard footsteps downstairs again. Nana jumped down from the chair and wanted to see if it was Anna who came back, but she was stopped by an invisible hand. Wait a minute, there's more than one person. Nana patted her chest and said with dissatisfaction, "You scared me, Sister Nightingale." The door was quickly pushed open. It was Brian, who was in charge of guarding the first floor. "Miss Pine, please come down. Someone has been scalded." Was he going to work? Nana took a deep breath. "I understand." She walked downstairs. 2 guards were busy carrying a person who kept screaming miserably to a bed. There was also a short man standing beside them, his face full of anxiety. Brian stepped forward and nimbly tied the wounded man's hands and feet to the bedside. The guard then carried the short man out of the room and pulled the curtain that served as a partition. "What happened?" Roland asked as he walked downstairs while rubbing his eyes. "Your Highness, the North Slope mine has sent a seriously injured person. It seems that he was scalded." The prince walked over to take a look. "It's a steam burn." "Is there a problem with the prototype? Where's the person who brought him here?" "In the hall." Brian pointed in the direction of the door. "I'm going to ask about the situation. I'll leave it to you," Roland said as he walked towards the exit. Nana slowly moved to the man's side, using her peripheral vision to look at him. She saw that the facial features on his face had turned into a paste. His originally red skin had turned into a dehydrated pale white, like a rag hanging on his face. His neck was full of bowl-sized blisters, some of which had already burst. The mucus that oozed out was mixed with blood, soaking the pillow. Under the flickering light of the fire, his appearance was even more terrible than the devil in her nightmares. She took 2 steps back, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her father was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay?" Nana nodded, thinking of what Roland had told her. "Treat the wounded as if you were treating a small animal." She went back to the bedside and stretched out her hands. An incredible feeling emerged from her body and gathered in her palms. She saw a light green fluorescent liquid flowing out from her palms and dripping on the wounded man's face. Although this fluorescent light was so obvious, the people around her turned a blind eye to it. Then the wound began to change. The scalded skin continued to fall off, and new skin grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. The man's painful moans gradually stopped, and his breathing became steady, as if he had fallen into a deep sleep. Nana breathed a sigh of relief. Compared to the last time, her performance should have improved a lot, right? "Oh my God! Is this the healing power that His Highness had mentioned?" "This is the first time I've seen it," Pine exclaimed. "My good daughter, you are really amazing." "It's the power of God," Brian also sighed with emotion. "When I was injured, it was Miss Nana who gave me a helping hand. I'm really grateful to you." "Ah, this fool." Nana covered her face. "Didn't he know that it was Sister Nightingale who had sneaked me out? When did that happen?" Pine felt strange. "How come I didn't know about it?" Cough. "Her power has nothing to do with God. It only belongs to the witches themselves." Roland opened the curtain and went back into the room, coughing twice to change the topic. "How are the injuries of the people who were sent here?" "Basically healed," Brian said excitedly. "It's as if they had never been injured. Your Highness, with Miss Nana's help, during the months of demons, everyone has a chance to survive. As long as they don't die on the spot, keeping their lives won't be a problem." The prince nodded, motioning Brian to wake the man up. "You're called Iron Head, right?" The man called Tai Tu sat up with a confused look on his face. Am I dreaming?" "No," Roland said. "You are still alive." "You are. I've seen you in the square." The man seemed to suddenly wake up, turning from the bed and kneeling on the ground. "Your Royal Highness the 4th Prince, did you save me?" It was Miss Pine who saved you. She is a witch with the ability to heal. Nana's heart tightened. How could he say that she was a witch so directly? Sure enough, the way the man looked at her changed. Witch? Your Highness, they are not the devil. What nonsense are you talking about? My daughter has nothing to do with the devil. She is the one who saved your life. Mr. Pine stood up and shouted in dissatisfaction. My daughter has nothing to do with the devil, she saved your life. Do you think the devil will lend you a helping hand? No, no. Please forgive me for my rudeness. Ironhead immediately bowed his head. Thank you for saving my life, Miss Pine. Nana suddenly felt inexplicably uncomfortable. She wanted to immediately rush out of the room. But there was a voice in her heart repeatedly reminding her, be strong. After Ironhead was sent away, Sir Pine worriedly asked, Is this really good, Your Highness? In this way, I'm afraid my daughter will not be able to live a normal life. Think on the bright side, Mr. Pine, the prince comforted. Only by breaking the deadlock during this period can Nana be truly free in the future. Otherwise, as she grows older, one day she will be exposed, and I'm afraid she can only live in isolation. Chapter 44. By the time Roland returned to the castle, it was already late, and the snow outside was getting heavier. He went into his bedroom, took off his coat, shook off the snow on his collar, and hung it on a hanger by the fireplace. Your Highness, don't you think this is too hasty? Nightingale appeared in front of the prince. Nana. Roland poured himself and Nightingale a glass of wine. Although this ale was much more bitter than the beer of his previous life, he had gradually become accustomed to this taste. Nightingale took the glass, but she didn't drink it. She was waiting for the prince's answer. There is no more suitable time than now. Roland drank the wine, and then filled his own glass again. If you want to display Nana's ability during the months of the demons, it is impossible to hide your identity as a witch. Being able to instantly cure a fatal injury is by no means possible with ordinary herbs or bloodletting. This is something everyone can think of. Thanks to this dispensable town located outside the western border, the influence of the church here is very limited. If I were them, I wouldn't be willing to squander the golden dragon in this place, which can be abandoned at any time, Roland continued. There isn't even a chapel in the town, and the missionaries have already returned to Longsong's stronghold with the nobles. At this time, what do you think Border Town looks like? An isolated island cut off from the outside world. Did you plan this long ago? Nightingale asked. Roland nodded. The heavy snow will cover the road to Longsong's stronghold, and the dock shipping is in my hands. We have at least 3 months to change the view that witches are evil. If it is only propaganda, the effect will be extremely limited. We must rely on close contact in order to quickly eliminate this misunderstanding. This was the reason why he wanted to keep Nana. He wanted to create a different version of Nightingale. This legendary nurse, because of her dedication to taking care of the wounded, reduced the death rate from 42% to 2%, was given the title of the goddess of the lamp by the soldiers, and even the reputation of the entire nurse profession was raised to worship. Nana's ability was even more magical. She could use her magic to heal wounds. As long as they didn't die on the spot, they could be saved. This was probably more effective than any weapon in raising the morale of the militia. At the same time, thanks to her father being a declining nobleman, he often dealt with hunters and farmers. His attitude towards the commoners was very gentle, and even allowed Nana to study at the academy opened by Teacher Carr. If it were other nobles, even the lowest-ranking baron, they would not be willing to let their daughter be associated with this group of people. In their eyes, these people were the so-called untouchables. Can these really be done? Even Nightingale, in the face of such a colossal force like the church, seemed exceptionally powerless. If we don't take this step, we will never know the answer. Roland did not expect the entire town to change their minds because of this, but at least he had to hold the new team firmly in his hands. In the future, he would rely on these seeds from among the people to spread his ideas. 3 months was enough to change a lot of things. Nightingale was silent for a moment, then whispered, Why do you want to do this for the witches? in order to liberate the productive forces, in order to obtain more power, in order to have a place in the future battle for the throne. Of course, these answers were not suitable to be said at this time. Although Roland was a mechanical dog, but he had also played a lot of dating games, he could be regarded as a veteran, and had seen many things. The experience of more than 20 years of his two lives reminded him that at this time, he was facing the answer to a key question. He carefully chose his words and slowly said, "Didn't I already tell you that Border Town doesn't care about one's background? I hope that one day, even a witch can live like a free person in my territory." This time, Nightingale was silent for a long time, and the only sound in the room was the crackling of the burning charcoal. The side of her face was illuminated by the flickering flames, and it was like a beautiful picture. When she opened her mouth again, Roland had the illusion that time was flowing again. "In fact, you don't have to do this." Her voice was distant and soft. "Please forgive me for lying to you before. The Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association have been homeless for too long. They don't have too many extravagant expectations. As long as they have a place to live, they will be satisfied, even if it is in this castle." "What's the difference between that and a cage?" Roland shook his head, then suddenly seemed to understand, and stared at Nightingale. "Wait, you mean, you are willing to bring them here?" Nightingale sighed, avoiding the prince's line of sight. "In this way, you will become the enemy of the church. Their hands have already stretched too far," Roland said. "Once the slogan of the divine monarchy comes out, the conflict between the church and the countries of the continent is only a matter of time. As for Border Town, as long as it passes through these 3 months smoothly, they won't be able to do much. This place is thousands of miles away from the church's lair. The bishop will bring a large army of judges across the entire Grey Castle to crusade against me. My father will never allow such a thing to happen. This is a serious provocation to the dignity of the royal family." When Nightingale left, Roland lay down on his bed and let out a long sigh. There were some things he didn't say. The church was thousands of miles away. According to the speed of the spread of news in this world, he was afraid that they would only react after the end of spring. Coupled with the long distance and his identity as a prince, the biggest possibility was that they would send an envoy to investigate the situation. In this way, he was afraid that the return trip would take half a year. By that time, he should already have the strength to break off relations with them. Therefore, the biggest hidden danger wasn't the church, but the witches themselves. This was something only Roland could see. Although the witches were at a disadvantage, this situation wouldn't last forever. Witches didn't rely on bloodline inheritance, but awakened randomly without any rules, which meant that witches couldn't be exterminated. They would only increase in number. The church relied on the god's stone of retaliation to maintain an advantage over the witches, but this advantage could only be used to counteract magic. At present, the witches' awakening not only gave them a variety of abilities, but even their physical fitness, thinking, reaction, and even their appearance had a tendency to surpass ordinary people. In essence, they could already be regarded as new humans. The more cruel the oppression, the more intense the resistance. When a pure witch-led riot was set off, how much damage would it cause to Grey Castle? The hatred born from the church, once it couldn't be controlled, it was very likely to turn into an indiscriminate hatred of all the people of the kingdom. Roland didn't want to see that happen. Therefore, he needed to start from Border Town, to construct a structure that could accommodate both of them, and then spread it to the whole of Grey Castle, and even the mainland kingdom. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.